That's right, and go easy on your shoulder. Ready to go? Are we ready to go? Thank you, everybody, for showing up. I want to call the meeting, the September meeting of the Redondo Beach Harbor Commission to order. Could we have a roll call, please?
The mic's on. Can we hear? Okay. Commissioner, no, not on.
It is on.
Commissioner Callahan?
Here.
Commissioner Jackson? Commissioner Keidser?
Here.
Commissioner Kilroy?
Here.
Commissioner Light?
Here.
Commissioner Scheer?
Here.
And Chair Jackson. Chair Dalton.
Here. Thank you very much. Would everybody please rise for a salute to the flag? Commissioner Kilroy, would you lead us, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Her husband is chair.
Okay, approval of the order of agenda. Any issues with the commissioners?
No.
Motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Blue folder items, Director.
So this evening, come on. All right, I'll try that again. Kind of soft, isn't it? So this evening there are 3 blue folder items that you have in front of you. The first blue folder item, well, I think I have these in the order, but basically what you have is you have a blue folder item that are additional emails that we've received since your July 10th public hearing. So as you may know, we continue to receive emails both in support and in opposition, and we've included all of those emails in your packet for you this evening, and we've tacked on a couple of extra ones that we received right up until about 5:30 this evening. So we're trying to give you them as we receive those. The second blue folder item, last month in your packet, there were 2 appeals that were filed with the California Coastal Commission related to the boat ramp project. When we produced your packet last month, one of the appeals that was filed by Laura Zahn, some of the pages were omitted from your packet, and so those pages are now included as a blue folder item for you this evening. So you have that in front of you. And then the final blue folder item, in reviewing tonight's report, we realized that the staff report that was prepared by the Coastal Commission, the substantial issue staff report that was prepared by the Coastal Commission, when we reproduced that into your packet, we had one of those classics. We got pages 1, 3, 5, 7 sort of situations. And so we have given you a blue folder packet that is the full report. And you actually had that in your July packet as a full report as well. So you may have even reviewed it as part of your July packet. I would note that we also have extra copies of that Coastal Commission staff report. So if any member of the public would like a complete version of that, if you downloaded a copy of the agenda and you have sort of the odd numbered pages, we do have the full report here. We're happy to give that to any member of the public who may have gotten a copy that had the pages omitted. And that's what you have in your blue folder this evening.
All right, thank you, Director. I really appreciate staff keeping us apprised of these emails that come in. I know it's a living, dynamic process. Consent calendar. Any issues with the consent calendar from the commissioners? Motion to approve the consent calendar.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Excluded consent, none. Public participation on non-agenda items. Pretty good showing tonight. Anybody here for a non-agenda item? This is that portion of the meeting. Ian? For non-agenda items, right?
A few words for to say. Mr. Chairman, members of the Harbor Commission, my name is Ian Bardeen. I am a resident of District 2. I'm addressing these comments to the Commission as required. However, they are directed to staff and in particular Acting City Attorney Cheryl Clark. I have been told by Commissioner Vicki Callahan that prior to the previous meeting of the Harbor Commission on July 2nd, 2017, to address the questions and comments of the Coastal Commission, Ms. Park approached Commissioners Vicki Callahan and Jim Light in an attempt to persuade them to recuse themselves from participating at the hearing by the Commission. According to Commissioners Callahan and Light, Ms. Park could not cite any statute or legal authority prohibiting either commissioner from participating, but according to Commissioner Callahan, suggested that she consider the possibility of criminal prosecution and incarceration. Notwithstanding that there is no statute prohibiting either Commissioner Callahan or Commissioner Light from participating, there is a statute addressing the actions of Ms. Park, which is California Penal Code Section 136.1, which makes it a misdemeanor to knowingly and maliciously prevent or dissuade any witness or victim from attending or giving testimony at any trial, proceeding, or inquiry authorized by law, or knowingly and maliciously attempts to prevent or dissuade any witness or victim from attending or giving testimony at any trial, proceeding, or inquiry authorized by law. Every person doing any of the described acts just read, knowingly and maliciously under any or one or more of the following circumstances is guilty of felony punishable by imprisonment. And that is in the furtherance of a conspiracy. And I doubt if Ms. Park acted alone. I'm guessing that she was not Christopher Darden with the infamous glove decision in the O.J. Simpson trial. Basically, the reason I'm bringing this out, I think it was an improper tactic on behalf of Ms. Park, and I'm not going to attribute that to staff in general, because I don't know whether she was acting on her own or at the consent or instructions of other members. But the actions by Ms. Park not only are illegal, but exemplify staff's disregard of the citizens of Redondo Beach's right to a fair hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Commissioner Callahan, we're glad to have you.
Thank
We
you.
value your experience and certainly respect your position.
Thank you.
Good
Mark.
evening, Commissioner, staff, Mark Hansen, King Harbor Yacht Club. We have a fun event to announce. Coming up on Saturday, September 16th, we're going to have Coastal Cleanup Day. This is huge, 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 organized by the Department of Boating and Waterways and Heal the Bay, and the Board of Directors of King Harbor Yacht Club unanimously agreed to let everybody come down and use our place to stay and go clean up our harbor. So bring buckets, bring gloves, bags, come on down. There'll be people there that will teach you where to go and look for the trash. It'll be 9 a.m. Till noon at King Harbor Yacht Club. And of course, our galley will be open so you can have breakfast and or lunch and really get your energy up to come out and help us clean up the harbor. We're specifically looking for people with boats, kayaks, SUPs. Obviously, the kayaks and SUPs can get in places where the trash is the bigger boats can't get. So come on down and help us clean up our harbor and our ocean. Thanks.
What was the date on that again, Mark?
It's going to be Saturday, September 16th.
Thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners. Wayne Craig, District 1. I'm here tonight to commend various members of the Harbor Commission. First, I want to acknowledge Commissioner Vicki Callahan. Despite being intimidated, bullied, and threatened with legal action by our city attorney for doing her job, is here tonight standing up for her convictions and duty to protect the people of Redondo Beach. Another is Commissioner Keidser. As an attorney, other commissioners should be listening to her concerns, especially about safety and liability for our harbor. Sadly, these two were the only commissioners here tonight that stood up against the fiscally irresponsible mall and dangerous boat ramp location rammed through by Senator Cal, city staff, and our Chamber of Commerce. The others here tonight, I'm wondering why you still support the mall and dangerously located boat ramp. You know the people don't want it with a landslide passage of Major C, and it's clearly unsafe. So I have to ask you, why are you resisting the winds of change? I also wonder why one of you consistently refuses to vote on principles, which I'm sorry don't make a lot of sense. Commissioner Tarek Shahir, if you know that the boat ramp is unsafe, vote against it, period. I don't understand what you need to think about. Refusing to vote just allows this fiasco to continue, so please, vote with what you know to be true, which is it's not safe. Finally, each of you should be outraged that after tonight, Jim Light will no longer be part of this commission. Even though Light is clearly on the Harbor Commissioner right now and highly qualified, council members Laura Emby and Christian Horvath won't renew his position. They would instead rather have it remain vacant or be filled by a political appointee. Regarding Commissioner Light, he is more knowledgeable and experienced than city staff and the Vice City Attorney with matters regarding the harbors. This last year commission should make each of you livid. I would even question the wisdom of having meetings until this irresponsible action has been corrected. For those here tonight still refusing to take a stand and do the right thing, why are you here at all? The threat of former Harbor Commissioner Michael Jackson, who was also the Chamber of Commerce chairman and in charge of their huge political action committee, is gone. We all know that while in that position, he funneled close to $75,000 to Redondo Beach political candidates. He's no longer here, can't control you anymore, and the nearly $800,000 a year contract that the chamber had with the city has been terminated. As harbor commissioners, you are supposed to represent the best interests of the residents of Redondo Beach, not for the special interest donors like Senator Callahan. Please do your job or resign. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Other public participation, non-agenda items? Very good. Moving, oh, I'm sorry.
Neil Darrenheim, Councilman, right here in Redondo Beach. I want to thank Nikki Callahan for making herself available and coming down here tonight and ruling on giving an opinion on Boat Launch Ramp. I also want to lend my support to her as well because I know her and some other people in the city, myself included, were told some incorrect things. And as you guys are sitting on a commission that is that gives out building permits and use permits, as well as a planning commission, I want to remind you guys that you guys up here act in a way like a city council. So when things are said to you, it doesn't seem right, definitely get a second or third opinion. I'm available to you all, as well as the mayor and everyone else. And I wanted to give Ms. Callahan the back her statements up because I was shocked and appalled when I first heard about what I heard about the boat launch ramp and the information that she was told that she needed to recuse herself. To that effect, I was told last May as well, before I was sworn in, but yet after I was elected, an overwhelming majority of people, I was told by our city attorney, acting city attorney, that if I was asked to recuse myself from the city attorney's office, that I too would face possible criminal prosecution, that I would face civil litigation, and that the city would not back me up. Well, all that is false. Just so you know, the FPPC has no ability to hand out criminal jail time sentences. The FPPC has no ability to force someone to remove themselves from an appointed position or an elected position, and anything contrary to that position or even face civil litigation is absolutely false. So just wanted to give Ms. Callahan the knowledge, and all the rest of you guys, that if something is said to you, feel free to reach out to one of us council members, myself, or Mayor Brand, and I will move forward and ask whatever resources I can. In this case, I will be going to the city manager's office and asking Mr. Hefkin as to what we can do to follow up with this particular situation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else? Public participation? I want to thank everybody for their participation here. It really does help to hear from the public on these issues. Moving along, ex parte communications. We are going to have a public hearing. Commissioner Callahan.
I did speak with Council Member John Gran. We actually walked Moby, and I did speak with Mayor Bill Brand to clarify some issues.
Very good. Commissioner Sherrick?
None to report.
I've had communication with Mark Hansen, and that's about it. Other boaters and fishermen.
I'm not sure how far we're supposed to go back on this issue because we had a public hearing on it, but in the spirit of being thorough, I've had discussions with Commissioner Callahan, I've had discussions with Mark Hansen, I've had discussions with several boaters, yacht club members, marina slip tenants, and various other people. I think too numerous to disclose at this point.
Yeah, I agree, that's an issue. How far back do you go?
Yeah, how far back?
All those that she mentioned, and quite frankly, I'm not even sure how many more, because this goes back,
Yeah.
for me, for well over 10 years. I've voted on other locations of the boat ramp, so, I mean, I have a public record with regards to that. A lot of people.
Commissioner Light?
Just since the last meeting, I've spoken with several members of the public, boat owners, SUPers, kayakers, some councilmen, and some folks at King Harbor Yacht Club. So,
Okay, very good. Thank you. All right, before we begin the public hearing, I just want to run through the run rules for people. There are sign-in cards if you want to speak. I'll take them, first come, first served. Please write clearly. I apologize in advance if I mispronounce your name. Please be patient. We want everybody to speak. Everybody's got 3 minutes to speak. The lights on the side are green for when you're have plenty of time. I think yellow is 30 seconds and red means you've overrun your 3 minutes. So, get your notes together, and when you approach the podium, speak out your name. If you represent the group or a group behind you, please let us know any relevant background. I think that's about it. We're going to go over alternatives for Mole B, Mole C, Mole D, Mole A, if anybody wants to talk about it. That's the public hearing this month. Any questions, or anybody from the commission want to add to that? Please be respectful. Let everybody talk without interruption. All right, thank you so much. So with that, Director.
Thank you, Chair Dalton, members of the Harbor Commission. So as you indicated, tonight is the second public hearing that we're having on the topic of the public boat launch facility over the last 3 months. The last public hearing was held in July. The first hearing in July was to take public testimony regarding the letter of incomplete application and the California Coastal Commission staff report on substantial issue. The purpose of the meeting tonight is a public hearing to receive comments on alternative locations within King Harbor for a public boat launch facility that addresses the finding of substantial issue by the California Coastal Commission related to the approved Mole B location. I'll give you a little bit of a background, and then I will ask John Moore, who has been our marine engineer on this project for many years, to jump into our presentation that we have for you this evening. As you all know, the siting of a public boat launch facility within King Harbor has been a long-running topic that goes back many, many, many years. Some of our most recent efforts are related to the siting study that was initiated and for which there were public hearings and public meetings held within the early 2006 timeframe, in the February-March 2016 timeframe. I think I just said 2006. I meant 2016. We went through a siting study at various public workshops, and based on some of the feedback that we received at those public workshops, as well as feedback that we received from the Harbor Commission, there were additional options that were prepared, refinements were made, and we presented additional options for Mole A, Mole B, and Mole C. We had discussions at a staff level with the California Coastal Commission staff, and in large part, based on some of those conversations and some of the evaluations that we had conducted, we recommended to the Harbor Commission Mole B as the preferred location for the public boat launch facility. That recommendation was presented to the Harbor Commission, and it was part of at least 3 meetings that the Harbor Commission held to discuss the public boat launch facility. And ultimately, on October 10th, the Harbor Commission held a public hearing and adopted Mulby as the location for the public boat launch facility and took several actions as a part of that, including a conditional use permit, the Harbor Commission design review, and I tried to explain this at our last meeting, and I'll take another crack at it again. You approved a coastal development portion for a small portion of the project that's within the city's jurisdiction, which is generally limited to improvements that are along Harbor Drive. Your action in improving the public boat launch facility also facilitated the city's filing of an application to the California Coastal Commission for their consideration of the remaining portions of the public boat launch facility, which was essentially virtually all of the project other than the improvements on Harbor Drive. Subsequent to your approval of the public boat launch facility, that decision was appealed to the City Council. On November 29th, the City Council conducted a public hearing on the appeal, and after considering all of the public testimony, denied the appeal and adopted a resolution sustaining the decision of the Harbor Commission. Subsequent to that action, we were notified that the coastal development permit issued by the city for our portion of the project was the subject of 2 appeals that were filed with the California Coastal Commission. And those appeals became the basis of the substantial issue hearing that was held by the California Coastal Commission on May 12th. At that hearing, the Coastal Commission found that substantial issues exist at the Mulby location and that the coastal development permit issued by the city should be taken up by the Coastal Commission as part of a de novo hearing on a date that has still, as of today, yet to be determined. Separate and apart from the actions associated with the coastal development permit issued by you, as I indicated earlier, we filed an application with the Coastal Commission on March 6th for the permit for a permit for those elements of the public boat launch facility within their jurisdiction. We were notified that that application was incomplete. They needed some additional information, and that was the letter of an incomplete application that we received. We had been working on a response to that letter when on June 13th, the City Council requested that staff, prior to submitting the additional information required by the Coastal Commission, hold 2 public hearings with the Harbor Commission. As I indicated, the first public hearing was held on July 10th, and that was to receive the comments on the incomplete application notice and finding of substantial issue. And the second hearing this evening is to review alternative locations for a public boat launch facility that would minimize the substantial issues identified by the Coastal Commission related to the Mulby location. I would like to note, and I think it's important to note, that when the Coastal Commission did their analysis of the public boat launch facility, their finding of substantial issue was limited to their review of Mulby. That was the only location that was reviewed because that was the only application that was in front of them at the time. Well, as we go through the presentation and we conduct our discussions this evening, there may be locations within the harbor that reduce or eliminate some of the issues or concerns that were identified at Mulby. Those sites will be the subject of additional analysis by the Coastal Commission if those become an alternative that gets presented to them. And ultimately, the Coastal Commission will need to fully and individually evaluate any proposed site to determine its suitability as a public boat launch facility within King Harbor. So I just want to raise that issue for you because I think it's important to note that while substantial issue was found at one location, an analysis of some alternative location could very well result in substantial issue. They may not be the same substantial issue, but there could be substantial issue at another location. So by just selecting another location that minimizes these doesn't mean that there couldn't be substantial issues associated with that. We won't know until the Coastal Commission actually does its evaluation of that. The purpose, as I stated earlier, is to have the public hearing this evening. And the public comments that we're collecting both as part of this public hearing as well as the last public hearing will be captured in our meeting minutes, and those meeting minutes will be transmitted to the City Council and to the Coastal Commission as part of the response letter to the incomplete application. So what we will do is we will address the questions that were in that letter, and then we will attach the meeting minutes from these 2 hearings, so that will be additional information for the Coastal Commission for them to consider as part of the response that gets submitted to them. So that concludes my introductory remarks. What I'd like to do is ask John Moore to take you through the PowerPoint presentation that he has. And as the chair has indicated, what we intend to show you tonight is really all of the various alternatives that we've looked at from the time we initiated the most recent siting study up to and including the time that you approved the Mole B location. We do have some information about some of the various alternative locations that speak to some of the issues that were raised by the Coastal Commission staff, for example, parking or loss of slips, some of the issues that they raised as part of their analysis. And then once that information has been presented to you, our recommendation is that you conduct a public hearing, and we're free to answer any questions that you may have. Ultimately, the direction that we received from the City Council was to seek input, and that's what we're here to get this evening. So with that, what I'd like to do is ask John Moore to make his presentation, if that's okay with the chair.
That sounds great.
Thank you.
Go ahead and proceed, John.
Thank you, Director Proud. Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, it's a pleasure to be here tonight. My name is John Moore, and on behalf of staff, we'd like to run through a brief PowerPoint presentation. Is this on? No?
It's very soft.
To run through a brief presentation, to which will be a review for many of you, to run through some of the alternatives that we've run through in this long process, touch on some of the substantial issues that have been raised, as Director Proud mentioned, and hopefully provide you with some useful information as you make your deliberations. We always like to start with a kind of a historical perspective, because I think it helps to set the stage on where you've been, how far you've come, and hopefully where you wish to go. So this is obviously King Harbor in 1939, at the upper left, when the breakwater was first under construction. In 1962, when you last had the clean slate. And it was that point in time when the harbor was just finished construction that was perhaps the best opportunity to certainly look at where to site a launch ramp in King Harbor. This was the 1959 view of, or hope, where the 59 master plan called for a 350 parking space plus site at Mole A, and that was intended to be the ultimate launch ramp site for King Harbor, and for a variety of reasons that never came to pass. Just by way of brief summary, between 1959 and 2016, this slide is meant to represent where launch ramp sites have been considered in King Harbor. The arrows represent the direction of the ramp itself, and as you can see, every conceivable location has been looked at, evaluated, studied, and considered. By my record, I think I'm the fifth engineer to be assigned this task, and there hasn't been many new leaves turned over, certainly by myself. So, the lessons learned from all this is, since the 1960s, the harbor's relatively small size and its long-term leaseholder agreements have established the land and water uses, and that's what's created the challenges for development of a suitable boat launch ramp at King Harbor. As I mentioned, every conceivable site and plan has been previously proposed and studied, and had the launch ramp been built in '63, the preferred location would have been within either basins 1 or 2, where the most shelter and the distance from outer harbor boat traffic was available. And then the harbor could have developed around it. So, with that brief introduction, what are the plans that that have been looked at most recently? Between 2015 and 2016, sites at Mole A, B, C, and D were evaluated, as you all know. looking at 1- and 2-lane alternatives for each location. And I'll briefly run through them just as a refresher to show what has been on the table in the past. The Mole A 1-lane ramp was kind of the starting point. This was meant to be the least cost option, where this 20 parking space, basically just a restriping of an existing parking lot, would provide a minimal ramp at the least cost, and that was kind of the starting point. There was a different variation to try to achieve better traffic flow, better circulation, which would then offset the parking stalls from the seawall itself, which would then obviously take up more land space in doing so. A 2-lane option at Mole A, to see what that looked like. The 40 parking space option obviously takes up significantly more space. And the 2-lane ramp, there were options to look at combining that also with a hand launch use, sharing of hand launching. Switching over to Mole B and working within areas that the city would have control over, there were options that looked at trying to align the ramp within Basin 2 itself, this being a 20-space option. During the outreach, there was some consideration or thoughts, could we not align the ramp more normal to the Basin 2, to align the ramp as you see here, but you split the parking lot in two, although you achieve the 40 parking spaces, a little less favorable traffic flow. A 1-lane ramp C plan was developed to see what that would look like. This is another 20 parking space plan, which would leave some additional room in the Joe's Crab Shack site for possible future hand launch development. 2-lane ramp that you're all familiar with, which had a substantial and a significant breakwater component attached to it. The breakwater was posed in order to provide protection for the ramp and the boarding floats. Mole D, a 1-lane option, was looked at the southernmost end of Mole D. The ramp, the single-lane ramp aligned parallel to the entrance to Basin 3. A 2-lane option at Mole D between the sport fishing pier and the entrance to Basin 3 was configured for roughly less than 40 parking spaces. And the plan was also desirable with breakwater protection because of the exposure that it would have to the entrance, but we'll get into that in a little bit in the next couple of slides. As shown here, the breakwater option for Mole D, although would afford significant protection for the boarding floats and the ramp itself, would obviously create some significant obstructions to navigation and traffic, and is frankly not very practical. Then moving on into, after the substantial public outreach and Harbor Commission meetings and further discussion, these options were then refined to each site to see how could we perhaps improve options at each site. So the Mole A plan, this was a consideration that was suggested for a possible future development when leaseholds would become available. and the entire parcel could perhaps be reconfigured for a public launching and boating activity area. The plan had a significant inner splash wall to protect itself from overtopping on the breakwater. There were some storage areas for hand launch and other boating, and there was multiple lanes for possible boat launch and combined hand launch use, and also a hoist activity as well. Mole B was developed when that site became immediately available as a result of a lessee cooperation and the city's hold on the site. And this plan was I call it a pocket launch ramp site. It's perhaps one of the smallest layouts of all, but it includes every use that was desired by the public, including a hoist for the more physically challenged boaters, much longer queuing dock space, reconfigured for longer parking spaces to accommodate longer vehicles or longer vehicle trailer combinations. And the 2-lane ramp could also be used for possible joint hand launch and boating use. Mole C was revised to configure the ramp to face away from the Seaside Lagoon hand launch area and provide a more direct launch access to the harbor entrance itself. The plan concedes that a breakwater would be too impacting, and therefore not having a breakwater could perhaps result in some extra maintenance activity or extra maintenance issues for the boarding float and perhaps operationally for the ramp itself. But nevertheless, this was the revised plan that came out of the outreach process. The Mole D layout, which was a straw man to see what a Measure C ramp configuration might look like at Mole D, where a 60 parking space ramp facility that would accommodate larger boats with trailers, and a ramp that would obviously, in this case, not have the breakwater for reasons that we talked earlier, but it would also, too, would experience some potential issues with maintenance and operations due to wave activity. So quickly, just to compare the different options. This slide just runs through some of the statistics of the Mole A, the revised A, B, C, and D sites in terms of the lot size, the number of vehicle trailer parking spaces that each one could accommodate, approximately how much queuing could occur at each site, and the number of boat slips lost. So you can see that we're not dealing with very large lot sizes, with the exception of Mole D, which is probably a minimal launch ramp site compared to other areas around California. The queuing capacity is roughly the same, with Mole A perhaps having a slight edge. And then Mole D, one of the substantial issues was loss of slips, and certainly Mole B would result in loss of 39 slips. Mole A would require some reconfiguration of the King Harbor Yacht Club slips in order to accommodate that facility.
The other substantial issue that was raised by the Coastal Commission was parking or loss of parking. This slide is a summary of what each site would, or the impact that each site would have on loss of parking spaces. And as you can see, Mole D, because of the size of the facility and the amount of parking that already is at that location now, would have the largest impact. Mole B, Mole C, the least, and Mole A in the middle. Just briefly to touch on access to each of these sites, because that was a topic that was looked at length. For the Mole A site, this was the revised plan to make the Yacht Club Way approach acceptable, where Yacht Club Way would be reconfigured into a dual lane traffic approach or dual lane entrance lanes, a turnaround circle at a kiosk at the far end, and that would throttle traffic and control traffic to the more narrow entranceway or entrance lanes to the rest of the ramp. Mole B, a straight shot from Marina Way, about 865 foot from North Harbor Drive to the parking lot itself. Mole C would provide for a 390-foot long turn pocket on Portofino Way, as shown in the green. And in order to make that happen, the existing right-of-way now curb to curb is 33 feet, which makes the lanes a little more narrow than is desirable. So ultimately, some work would probably be necessary there in order to widen those lanes a bit. And Mole D is this is the circulation pattern from North Harbor Drive, which I think is fairly straightforward. At the last Harbor Commission meeting, there was a request to look at hand launch considerations. So this slide is meant to provide some initial discussions to guide perhaps the conversation in that avenue as to what would be the hand launch considerations for various hand launch options, or launch ramp options, excuse me. And the likely scenarios obviously are going to depend upon whether or not there is or is not a waterfront project. If a waterfront project is to move forward, then the notion is that the enhanced seaside lagoon with its zero depth beach open to the harbor would provide a focused hand launch activity there, and the logistics of getting the users to and from that facility would be worked out in the details. If the waterfront project was not to go forward, it's assumed that existing seaside lagoon hand launch facility would remain in place and be the primary facility for hand launch use for the public. And we do think that if a new boat launch facility is built at either Mole A, B, or D, that there is an opportunity or opportunities to provide for and accommodate a secondary hand launch use. And that would be similar to what Santa Barbara Harbor has done and what Ventura Harbor has done, where they've combined, they've provided opportunities for both activities. Some of the design options briefly that would go into that combined usage: obviously launch ramp pavement. The Division of Boating and Waterways has a revised or a low height V-groove detail that they like and approve for hand launch ramp. That's what was used on one side of the Santa Barbara Harbor ramp, for instance. Boarding floats themselves, one can install lower freeboard floats or flexible low-height dock products adjacent to existing full-height boarding floats. There's also a number of vendor products out there that have hand launch assist capabilities to them that can be installed either adjacent to an existing boarding float or as a new boarding float. Or you can build a mini ramp into the boarding float itself. That's been done at Channel Islands Harbor and some other areas. Hazards and safety was another issue that was touched on by the Coastal Commission for the Mole B site. Just as in general for the King Harbor at large, this is a summary of the wave and surge exposure in the harbor. The overtopping waves conditions at Mole A are an issue. And when you get to the Mole C and Mole D and the turning basin area, the remaining section of the breakwater that has not been raised by the Corps of Engineers, plus wave energy that gets through the harbor entrance itself from severe storms, can lead to a frequency of occurrence of waves that can occur of heights anywhere from 2 to 6 feet, depending on the severity of the storm. So what that means is that facilities at that end of the harbor, the boarding floats will be exposed to more damage. There will be times operationally when the ramps might not be able to be used, and the same thing for the Mole A site. From a harbor traffic perspective, this diagram is just meant to illustrate all the different patterns of traffic that you're all familiar with that do occur in King Harbor within a relatively small space, and they occur from Mole A all the way down to the turning basin. The Mole B safety issue was addressed previously in 3 ways, and it's a topic for discussion. But the way it has been addressed thus far is in 4 ways. One is the sighting distance that's available for boaters to look ahead and make a decision as to when what traffic is before them. The launch and retrieval process that would occur in the Mole B site itself, primarily by virtue of the long and extra long queuing dock space that is designed into the Mole B site. Certainly the speed of travel, we're dealing with very slow speeds in this whole space. And finally, the management and operational aspects of the facility, where the Mole B ramp would be managed and controlled on a continuous basis by staff, such that traffic would be directed and controlled as to launch and retrievals, so that we wouldn't have any conflicts, or to minimize conflicts. There's been some talk of, or some questions rather, as to whether does this site, the way it is configured, does it meet state guidelines, the State Division of Boating and Waterways. And the Division of Boating and Waterways are guidelines that are not requirements, but they are suggestions by the state as to how one might lay out a marina channel or a launch ramp. And they handle a variety of different things, including channel geometry and separation of the slips from obstacles. So this slide is meant to illustrate that actually by the way mold B was intentionally laid out to kind of withdraw it a bit from the channel, the distances between opposite slips were increased, and therefore are within are at least within the minimum guidelines, or in some cases beyond the recommended guidelines. And that concludes the brief presentation.
So,
Around.
yeah, John's here. Trust me, he's here to tackle questions that you may have about any of the alternatives that you've seen. Our intent tonight was to really bring back this presentation, which is pretty much all the work we've been working on in terms of alternative locations, at least over the last couple of years, so that you could refresh your memory about all the various locations, what some of the design considerations were at each of those locations, and what some of the issues were that were raised as part of the substantial issue report. So, as I mentioned earlier in my presentation, the intent tonight is to hold a public hearing, take public comment on the alternatives that are here, that have been presented, any questions that may be raised relative to the presentation that John's made. We're going to capture this in the minutes, and these minutes, as well as your input, as well as the minutes and input from the last meeting, will all become part of the record that gets submitted to the Coastal Commission as part of our response to the incomplete application letter. So with that, our recommendation to you, Chair Dalton, would be to open the public hearing and accept public testimony.
Very good. Thank you, Director. Thank you, John, for consolidating all that. I know it's been a long road. Appreciate your efforts. Once again, to the public, if you want to speak, please fill out one of these cards. We'll take you in order and go from there. Right now, I'd like a motion to open the public hearing on the boat launch.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
So we shall begin. First member of the public, Sam Elder.
Good evening, members of the Harbor Commission. Thank you for letting me speak to you all. I am Sam Elder, a 41-year-old resident of Redondo Beach. I speak on behalf of so many of us who are lifelong boaters. I speak for those of us who are older and or physically challenged. We older boaters are well aware that in order for us to continue to use our harbor, harbor revitalization plan that you decide upon. It is the only choice that considers the needs of all our boaters that use the harbor. The ramp is perfect for the young, for those who are still agile, but it is essential that you remember that the hoist is the only approved ADA compliant method. That is because the hoist is the only accessible option for those of us more mature boaters who need more assistance and will continue to use the harbor if we have the hoist to help us do so. And of course, Redondo is known for its respect and inclusion of its older residents. Let's keep our harbor inclusive and welcoming. It only makes sense to keep the harbor accessible to all boaters, young and old, challenged or not. Long for the sea. We must respectfully insist on including the hoist as part of any plan you decide upon. I request that you remember the seniors are a large percentage of the Redondo community and growing larger. I I ask you to be inclusive of our entire boating community and continue to be the model of health, the shining example for all of South Bay. Sincerely, Sarah Mulberry.
Thank you, sir. Adrienne Defoe? Good evening.
Hi, good evening. My name is Adrienne Talfa.
Alpha. Very good.
I'm a native of Redondo Beach.
Hold on 1 second. Wait.
It's okay, I was at the DMV this morning and their whole computer system went down. It was a mess.
If we have a technical failure, I can enunciate pretty good.
I'm sure you can. Yeah. There we go, very good. Thank
When
you.
in doubt, turn the switch on.
I couldn't see.
My name is Adrienne Talfa. I'm a native of Redondo Beach. My husband and I own and operate Tees Tow Rings and Gifts on the Redondo Beach Pier. Our lease with the City of Redondo Beach has a clause in it that says the city at any time has the right to kick us out with 30 days' notice. I'm begging to please keep us in business. It will take several years to rebuild the pier and the waterfront. The Center Cal plan provides a venue for us to continue business during reconstruction. Tony's on the Pier, Mystical Joy, Redondo Pizzeria, and El Cinco de Mayo all join us in support of the Center Cal waterfront project. Approval of this boat ramp location is the next step in moving towards our goal of a revitalized waterfront, which is environmentally friendly, beautiful, and a legacy for the future generations of our city. Since 1994, the proposed Center Cal waterfront project is the closest anyone has ever come to a total plan to fix all the immediate needs of our decaying waterfront, and all without taxing our city or its residents. The pier itself will be much as it is today, and the waterfront will be improved for our many visitors. Last year, my husband fell through the pier. The hole is still there. Maintenance on the existing structures is not keeping pace with the decay. The parking structure is no longer has an exterior facade because so much of it has fallen off. The waterfront is an eyesore. Who else is going to fix the pier within even the next 5 years? Who else will maintain the waterfront, all within the guidelines set out by the city and the state? Our shop sits on the original 1960s wood pier. I fear that the time is soon coming when the pier will be condemned as unsafe, and still no one is willing to compromise on their position for the greater good of the community. Then comes our 30-day notice. Further stalling of the boat ramp location threatens the small businesses on the waterfront by delaying the entire Center Cal project. The opposition has nothing constructive to offer as an alternative. After delaying the project further, where exactly does that leave the waterfront businesses? With a 30-day notice. You simply cannot please everyone, but there are common needs. We can find common ground to go forward to make the waterfront safe and beautiful. Please support the waterfront merchants by approving a boat ramp location and moving the project forward before it's too late. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dennis Grote?
Commissioner Dalton, members of the Harbor Commission, city staff, thanks for the opportunity to speak to you tonight. Dennis Grote, long-term resident, long-time boater and small boater, wanted to share my thoughts with you on the boat ramp. We all know there's been study after study after study, but when you cut through it all, everything previous to the current one showed that when you look at the whole picture, just not the microscopic picture, the best overall location, all things considered, is Mole C. I want to talk to you about what I think are the most pressing issues that say Mole C is the best. The first one's accessibility. The tow vehicles, trailers, and boats have to get in and out of the ramp locations. And what was missing from the slide presentation is it showed the access roads, but it didn't show how you get to them. The only one of those locations that has a straight in, straight out access is Mole C off of Barrel Avenue and Portofino Way. And when you think about access, please keep in mind two words which have changed things dramatically. Cycle track. The cycle track looks like it's here to stay. That's great, but you got to look at what is involved in trying to get a vehicle in and out of any of those access points with the cycle track there. My opinion, Barrel Avenue, Portofino Way is the only one that provides safe, good access that the boaters will be able to use. Parking. When you look at parking, please understand that for boat users, the parking needs to be dedicated and it needs to be segregated. Now, segregated is usually a very bad word, but if you allow mixed use in a boat and trailer parking area, if you allow individual single cars to park near other users, it will not work. It'll be a disaster. And when you look at parking numbers, please look at only those spaces that are dedicated, segregated parking for boat trailers and boat tow vehicles. By the way, the idea of an additional hand launch ramp, if we need another hand launch ramp, please put it in a hand launch ramp area. To take a small area like we have in this harbor and try and put an additional use of a hand launch in with the small boat ramp area we have, I think is just asking for trouble. If we need more hand launch, put it in a hand launch area. Please don't mix those two. Size, yeah, it needs to be a minimum of 2 lanes. Please make sure we have at least 2 lanes. And safety. I've heard a lot of concern about the safety of Mole C or Mole D for boats coming out. Please remember, when a boat leaves the boat launch ramp dock, it's going 0. And the speed limit in the harbor is 5. And if you go down to the harbor any time on a weekend day in the summer, you'll see the entire harbor is covered with SUPs, paddle-powered craft, et cetera, et cetera. The boaters are already having to navigate through them. I do not believe that having a boat ramp near an area where there's SUPs or these paddle craft is going to create any additional hazard. We have a speed limit. We have a harbor patrol. I don't think that's going to be a hazard. Thank you for your consideration. As you look at this, please consider what's going to function best, what's going to work best. Last thought is, my understanding is that the Joe's Crab Shack company is having some sort of severe financial issues at this time. One of the reasons that Mole C was not looked at more deeply previously was the lack of availability for the remaining terms of the lease, which is probably in the neighborhood of 10 years. If their financial situation makes that site more available now, I think that's something we should look at. You have an opportunity now we may have never had before. Do it right. Let's get the right ramp in the right place. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Grote. Wayne Craig.
Good evening, Wayne Craig, District 1. The best location is Mole D. The best location is Mole D. Experts have weighed in practically every discipline and specialty, and they say it's the safest place in the harbor for the boat ramp. The only reason to deny Mole D, for example, would be that it would impact the proposed Center Cal Mall. Specifically, the huge restaurant market hall, the one that was proposed, that one I guess Najos was thinking about locating at until they found out that Center Cal was only going to give them an empty space and charge them $300,000 to $400,000 to fix it up. I really have a hard time understanding why a harbor commission would instead pick a location that is the most unsafe and reduces the functionality of the harbor. It really just doesn't make any sense. The best location is Mole D, so let's pick it already.
Thank you, sir. Am I missing somebody? Eugene Solomon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, and staff. My name is Eugene Solomon. I live in District 2. First thing I'd like to do is to thank Commissioner Callahan for being here. My hat's off to you, madam, for refusing to be cowed, cajoled, or bullied into compromising your principles. I thank you very much for being here tonight. Mr. Grote is correct. There is an issue with Ignite, who owns Joe's Crab Shack. Joe's Crab Shacks across the United States are closing without notice. Mr. Scherer is in real estate business. He could tell you that many times a lease would simply be invalidated by declaring for bankruptcy. So you have site control on Mole C. It's available to you. Let's have a presentation to the commission of the lease and searching for terms as to whether or not the lease has now been invalidated or eligible for invalidation based on the bankruptcy, or if anybody has been approached as to whether or not to renegotiate the long-term debt that is there at that site. I'm certain that Joe's Crab Shack, closing restaurants across the United States without notice, will be interested in that. What you have here, I'm not going to repeat what the Coastal Commission has found. They found substantial issue. There's no question there's safety issues. I'm in the insurance business. The punitive damages that you have with the willful and knowing placement of the boat ramp at Mole B will bankrupt the city. I don't know if punitive damages are paid for as part of our pool insurance. I suspect not. Usually it's not. It would be on the residents of the city of Redondo Beach, all of us, because you would rather have the tail wag the dog. You would rather have Mole B, what the gentleman said is the smallest possible solution. Now, nothing's perfect, but should we really opt for the smallest possible solution or the correct solution? And I don't want to stand here like two fleas arguing about who owns the dog that we're on. But Mole C was examined. Mole C and Mole D are far superior. And what Mr. Proud didn't say, but is worth noting, is that yes, the Coastal Commission may find substantial issue or some other significant issues with Mole C or Mole D, but it doesn't mean that you're precluded from submitting an application for it. It doesn't mean that you're precluded from considering Mole C or Mole D. In fact, when the Coastal Commission would look at multiple applications, which you are permitted to do, they may look and say, yes, this is the best of all the alternatives, Mole C or Mole D. But they're never going to know unless you submit that application, unless you put this forward to the City Council with a recommendation to submit an application for Mole C or Mole D. I realize it's been a long time, and we hope that it ends soon, that we have a solution. And I think we do have a solution. But as John Wooden would tell you, if you don't have time to do it right the first time, when will you have time to do it over again? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Brian Mitchell.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Brian Mitchell. I'm with Wanakeel Outrigger Canoe Club. And I realize that tonight is specifically to talk about the options, but there was some clarification that we'd like to make relative to Mole B, just for the record. In the last minutes, it had been noted that the outrigger facilities had been using the site for 20 years, and that was actually in error. I've been paddling for 20 years, but the Wanakeel has been on the site for 47 years. In the Coastal Commission had indicated that the city had not sufficiently justified the interpretation of allowing the parking areas and revetment as part of the park use on Mole B. Related was a concern that the definition of the above may set a precedent for future local decisions. This was brought up by Commissioner Light at the last meeting. We submit there's a distinction between open space as a zoning term in zoning codes and open space as a park definition. By example, Wilderness Park and Alta Vista Park are described as open space and both include perimeter slopes, parking, and interior access drives in their total square footage. We think that's a clear definition of park use and could be applied to the park on Mole B. Why does this matter to the outrigger canoe clubs? Without the initial city definition of a park in its open space, the area left over by ramp parking encroachment, a park, and harbor patrol facilities is not enough area to allow us to continue in our highly successful outrigger operations. We look forward to continuing to work closely with city staff on the future of Mole B and its development, with or without a boat ramp, but however it is developed, they will obviously impact our operations, and thank you for hearing me tonight.
Thank you, sir. Is there anybody else from the public who wishes to speak?
With your permission, Mark Hansen, King Harbor Boater, and with your permission, I'd like to make a submission.
Motion to receive and file.
Second.
The submission I made, you've all seen before, just some of the notes we've taken on primarily Mole B and Mole C as potential boat ramp locations. Sadly, I was only able to get 6 out for you, so you might have to make another copy. First off, just a couple technical things. One is a great PowerPoint presentation. I wanted to recommend the staff that you pop that onto the website along with the agenda. It's always great that I can direct people over to take a look at that after all the hard work. Second off, I picked up a couple inputs from people that were suggesting that this really should have been a workshop. You know, we've had some in the past, and there's been a lot of discussion about, you know, how much we discussed about each location at those meetings. But certainly for folks to try to do this in a 3-minute deal doesn't really give you the give and take you need to discuss it. I'm just going to touch a little bit on a couple things about Mole B, C, and D. I'm not going to say much about D. Certainly I attended all those waterfront meetings, and I saw the public initially talk about a public plaza there, and then the market hall was quite popular. Certainly you can build a great boat ramp in that location. Many boaters have said so, but we understand the landside people got some ideas they might want to do there instead. Mole B, I'm not going to spend too much time on it because it's been beat up on pretty good. You've all received the 16 concerns that all the boating organizations gave to me. You certainly have the 5 quotes from the boat captains that said it's unsafe, don't do it. Now, of course, Measure C was written to say the boat ramp can't be on Mole A or B. And you got the Department of Boating and Waterways asking some pretty tough questions after hearing all that. So I have a sense that Mole B is pretty much going down in flames, so it's down to C or D. On Mole C, you'll see in the package there, I wrote a section called Concerns, Perception, Mitigations, and you've heard this before. Noise issues are mostly a perception. I think some people think of it as being Lake Havasu or Colorado River. Coastal boat ramps are just a very, very different thing. There's no social environment, no go-fast boats. We've all talked about it. Mole C, we can certainly handle the traffic as long as we have a decent size parking lot for it and the queuing lane. I was great to see John show the 2017 Mole C 2-lane ramp without the breakwater, angled towards the harbor. That's a great solution, and I can tell you all the boaters who drop sails in there and all the people who train in there would love not having that surge mitigation breakwater in there. I'd remind us on parking for Mole C, we don't have to make it fit in the exact footprint of Joe's Crab Shack. That's about 38 spots. It's easy to pick up another 22 and comply with Measure C by shifting the lagoon a little to the south or using overflow over the Triton Oil site. I've checked with the authors of Measure C, and they say both of those are absolutely doable. Just finally, I want to mention the June 13th City Council meeting. Christian Horvath, seconded by John Grand, put a substitute motion that didn't pass, where they said, hey, let's continue to answer the Coastal Commission's questions about Mole B, but let's in parallel put in an application for Mole C. And Mike Wazanski at the end said, based on what you've told me this evening, it would be staff recommendation to withdraw the Mole B boat ramp and submit an application for a Mole C boat ramp. So anyway, in 3 minutes or less, there's just a few things for you to think about. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else from the public wish to address?
Good evening, Commissioners. Jean Zimmer, District 1.
I'm also a member of King Harbor Yacht Club, Redondo Beach Yacht Club, and Port Royal Yacht Club. I'm an attorney by profession, and I represent public entities who get sued. And I just cringe when I look at the decisions where it is not going to be, where you have experts telling you it's not safe. And I'm not going to give any suggestions on what mold you should put the boat ramp in, but please consider safety, because there's so much liability, and it is just not something that you need to take lightly. I mean, this is very important, and if you're going to pick something where experts have told you it's not a safe location, I mean, it just opens the city up to a lot of problems. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Carlson, District 2 and King Harbor Boater. I want to echo what a previous speaker said about crossing Harbor Drive at Barrel. If you want to try driving a truck and trailer on Harbor Drive along the bike path and trying to cross the bike path where there isn't a light, you're welcome to borrow my truck and trailer. That's a sincere offer. Get in touch with me. We can try it out. It's just no fun. You really want to cross Harbor Drive at the light and stay off Harbor Drive. You want to come down Barrel, go across the light, and keep going right to Portofino Way and stay off Harbor Drive. As far as on the water goes, the harbor is just like a cul-de-sac street. You've got one way in and out. If you lived on a cul-de-sac street and I came to you and I said, I'm going to put in a new business that has a lot more traffic, maybe I'm going to put in a rental car agency on your street, you'd want that rental car agency at the mouth, not at the back of the cul-de-sac. You just don't want all that traffic going up and down the harbor. The same thing goes for the boat ramp here. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else from the public wish to comment? Motion to close the public testimony.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Discussions amongst the commissioners. Thank you in order received, and we'll just start with the questions you have. My lights aren't working. Is there? Wait a minute, let me reset it.
Nope, not working.
Is it plugged in?
I don't know. All meetings on.
Well, while they fix it, you can.
Yeah, we'll just go manually, I guess. We'll start with you. I saw you reach first, Commissioner Light.
Thank you. First, I wanted to talk to the staff report that we've got, where it says that we're going to be the results of this will be submitted both to the council and to the commission. Is that, I thought the direction was to go back to council.
So we watched the entire motion that was presented. At no time during the entire motion or discussion that lasted about an hour was there a request to bring this back to council. That could certainly be direction that we receive from council. Council may give us a referral to bring this back. But as part of the original motion that was made, the original motion was to hold 2 public hearings and collect input regarding these issues.
I thought it was pretty clear that they directed not to go back to the Coastal Commission, but to submit it to the
So what,
Commission.
again, we watched this just the other day from the beginning to the end because I knew this question would be a question that would be raised. And the motion was to conduct to hold the letter, to hold the response until we held 2 public hearings on the matter. Once those public hearings were complete, we could collect the input, and at that point, we would make the decision about whether we send the letter to the Coastal Commission or not. There was never a request to bring it back to council. They could make that request to us.
But they did say don't respond to the Coastal Commission.
Until we held the 2 public hearings.
No, it didn't say until. He said do not.
Well, I don't mean to be argumentative,
That's what I
but I
heard.
just watched this for an hour the other day to make sure that I had the exact motion correct.
Second, I'm a little disappointed that this in-depth briefing wasn't up in time or given to us so that we could look at it and dissect it before we came here. This is a very important briefing. It's not a lot of new data. We should have had this well in advance, and the public should have been able to see it before they came up and opined. So I'm very I feel like this was kind of an intentional blindside to prevent people from digging into that briefing. But if we could go back to the briefing and go to the Mold D parking assessment, please. No, well, there you have minus 231. There's 67 vehicle trailer spots currently on Mold D, correct? Yes. So why are we taking away 231? Why couldn't we reallocate the parking back to those 67 spaces where we wouldn't need them anymore?
Commissioner Light, that number was generated by, if you take the footprint of the Mold D plan, and you overlay that on top of what's there now, it would eliminate those 231 spaces.
But you'd have the 67 times 2, which is more than that.
No, that did not include the, I don't believe that included the 61 spaces of those for the parking now.
But, and that drawing is just one configuration. There could be other configurations that could replace some of those single-car parking spaces, correct?
That's correct. Yeah,
So this is a bit arbitrary. There's other configurations, and you can certainly swap the current 67 trailer spaces for what you're going to replace with 60 in your seven trailer spaces less.
I think that all that we tried to do was to give a sense of the given the size of the the 3.5 acre, 3.6 acre launch ramp facility, which is about 2 acres larger at least than any of the other plans for A, B, or C, that would be the one of the impacts on that site. There's certainly different configurations that one can do, but in general, launch ramp parking is pretty rectangular or square. I mean, there's only so much that you can, that one can do to try to make it all fit in order to accommodate, the number of spaces there. So it's a, plus or minus, it's probably the range.
Okay, and I have a photo from when the Mold D boat hoists were first there that shows well over 100 trailer parking spaces in that area. And it worked at that time, so I'm not sure why we're constrained into the box pattern that you showed for Mold D. I believe there are other configurations that could preserve the current parking there without eliminating any.
So can I just make one more comment on that? So when we prepared the diagram for Mold D, the diagram for Mold D, as you may know, was prepared as part of a report that we prepared relative to Measure C.
Yes.
And the diagram, we looked at the parameters that were set forth in Measure C and tried to meet all of the criteria that was set forth on the Measure C parameters. Part of the reason that the 67 existing spaces weren't used is because there's a requirement in Measure C that says that the vehicle parking spaces need to be adjacent to the ramp or within 500 feet thereof. And depending on where the ramp is placed, those 67 parking spaces are actually on the northern portion of Mold D.
Yeah,
so
what I'm saying is you could replace any single car parking that you're using for trailers on the south end, you could make up in that north end because you've already got more parking spaces for trailers in the north end than is required.
I understand that question. So I wanted to tackle two different issues. I think one is that we had to reconfigure the parking to try to meet the requirement that was set forth. The requirement also requires that some of the spaces be longer spaces than are currently striped for that location today. When we looked at the circulation pattern for Mold D, we needed to create a new circulation pattern, as John showed in one of his previous slides, to address some of the queuing issues. Otherwise, we would have people queuing onto Harbor Drive. So while there certainly can be different configurations, I'm not trying to argue that. There are circulation patterns that need to be taken into consideration. If you look at some of the turnaround space for the ramp, if you look at some of the circulation patterns, we're adding washdown areas. So I just want to be clear that we don't believe that you can just simply replace the 67 spaces that are there today and that's going to be sufficient to provide the boat ramp. We think to create a boat ramp that's being addressed in any of our diagrams, we have turnaround spaces, we have washdown areas, we have parking spaces, we have queuing spaces, that those need to be considerations as part of the design, and as a result of that, you will lose parking on any of the mole locations, which is what the slide shows.
Well, I think that you can already see the wasted space in that drawing that we could use to replace parking and things like that. I believe that if we really worked that on as a community, we could configure that to meet everything in Measure C and still meet the, without losing any parking. Plus, on top of that, we're not necessarily designing the mole on Measure C right now. We're answering the questions from the Harbor Commission.
Correct. And
So if you put this at the same number of trailer spaces as you did, as you're buying into for Mole B, it would be a much less impact. So you're comparing apples to oranges in that parking comparison. I don't think that's fair.
all we're really showing is that we drew a diagram that was.
No, but go to the assessment. Go to that table.
Right. I know
That's
what the
based
table
on a
says.
specific configuration that you've made to look like, you know, it doesn't say Mole D Measure C compliant and Mole D not Measure C compliant. You did one.
That's correct.
One design to meet Mole C, and none of the others meet it.
That's correct.
So do a Mole D that doesn't meet it. And then you can compare apples to
Well,
apples.
I can. I mean, we could draw a much smaller
But
site
you biased
on Mole D.
the answer by the way you compared incongruent data.
Well, I think we could draw a Mole D in any configuration. I think John showed you two different alternatives for Mole D prior that we drew.
But in your parking assessment, which is what you're planning to respond to the Coastal Commission with, you're biasing the results by putting that amount of parking degradation. And I think that's a very biased approach. And I think we all understand why we're doing it.
Before you leave that point, let me ask a follow-up question. I'm a little confused also. If you go back to the Mole D plan that showed the 67 parking, boat and trailer parking spots.
60.
60. On the north side, there's some existing double parking spots that would be converted to single under this plan. And is that 231 consider that? Is that the net effect, or is it just consider what's lost within that framework shown? Because you would gain single-car parking.
We'd gain 30 spots if you stripe the doubles as singles.
Yeah, that's...
Right, if there's 60 doubles today, you would gain 30 by striping them as single.
You gain 2 times 67 because those are trailer spots today.
That's what I mean. They count as, there's 67, the number 60 or 67, whichever number we're going to use. So if it's 67 trailered spots, if we painted a stripe down the middle,
Right.
we would gain 67 spaces.
67, okay, you said 30, but...
I'm sorry, I apologize.
Yeah. Okay, so the 231 doesn't include that.
John, do you know? Okay, we'd have to look at that to see.
Okay, just thank you,
And real
Commissioner.
quick before we leave
go ahead.
this topic, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Where are the prior designs for Mole D that existed back when we had the early public workshops? Because that's not it.
So these two right here, John, you're going to go far. So when we had the public workshops in February of 2016 and March of 2016, the two versions that we showed of Mole D was this version, which was the 2-lane ramp, and this version, which was the 1-lane ramp. So that was what was presented in February and March, as well as at the March Harbor Commission meeting.
Okay, but neither of these are that parking disaster that was up there just a minute ago.
So as I said,
So-
so to go to Commissioner Light's point, these would be configurations for Mole D that would not comply with Measure C as it's drafted today. So the point was made, you could draw Measure D many ways. We did. We drew it one way here. We drew it a 1-lane alternative. And then to see what a Measure C version could look like, we then drew a version that would comply with the provisions that were in Measure C, and that was the alternative that we presented.
And I'm quite certain if I sat down with an architect, I could get to where it's not that impact, 231, and still comply with C. So it really looks like you're biasing your results.
All I'm doing is just presenting the data that we presented.
Well, it's pretty biased.
I mean, just to make one point for clarity on this plan here, the parking impact would be roughly 160 spaces.
Minus the 67 that you're taking from the north end.
Okay, so then it might still be about 100 spaces. I mean, we didn't calculate, for each of these alternatives, we did not go through and calculate total parking loss versus, for every single alternative that's been presented here. We did that for the alternatives.
Didn't
that
optimize to preserve parking.
Well, look, I mean,
If the goal is to preserve parking, and that's what you want to see.
we
with the
could draw
Coastal
this
Commission,
10 or 12 more different ways, and eventually we might come to some
it's something you're sending the Coastal
division.
Commission for them to make a decision on. So it's biasing the outcome.
I think we've drawn 3 different versions for Mold D. We've drawn a one-lane ramp, we've drawn a 2-lane ramp, and we've drawn a Measure C compliant version for Mold D. So I think that was something we were tasked to do, and that's what we did.
As to the dock for the hand launch boat ramp, where you have it at the same place as the proposed launch, boat launch, I have launched from concrete ramps in my kayaks and on my SUPs, and it's hazardous. It's very hazardous. It gets slick, even with grooves, whatever you put in it. I've launched them in Florida. I've launched in California. It's very dangerous. I've gone scuba diving off ramps like that, and they inevitably get slippery and they're dangerous. So I think the only thing we should consider there is some type of other float that is convenient for kayaks. But what's apparent to me is the fact that we're bringing this up this late. We've been saying this for how long now? Since 2015, that it's a potential alternative launch site. And only now are we talking about alternatives that would make it usable by kayakers. Kind of shows that that part's an afterthought. As to the wave and surge thing, those certainly are real, but it's funny how for all these years now we've been, and multiple workshops, MOLC was okay with all of that, and now all of a sudden that's one of the driving criteria for launch. If we really have a storm out there that's pushing a dangerous surge in, it's most likely you don't want people going out of the harbor mouth anyway. I launch off the hand launch boat ramp. I see the waves there. C is actually, depending on the waves, worse than D. But it's rare that I've never seen a 6-foot other than in full raging gales, and you wouldn't be letting boats out of the harbor then anyway. I doubt you'd let them use the boat ramp under those conditions. And if we really got bad conditions where it's overtopping the breakwater there, wouldn't you rather have a parking lot for a boat ramp get inundated than your market hall? That's a rhetorical question. Let's see, as far as can we go to the slide with the Molby fairway width?
It's under the safety provision. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so right now in there, you've got 2 boats that are 80 feet. They both extend beyond the finger. And if you put the second one in there, you're definitely below the 140. If you go straight back, you're beyond the, you have much less than the 140 feet. Also, there's 2 side ties at the top part of that. It would be east of the boat launch facility, right where the landing queuing dock is. That can accommodate an 80-foot boat. That does not have the space in the fairway to accommodate the fairway width. So it's a very narrow fairway. It's tough to navigate. If you've ever seen SUPs and boats coming out of there, it's very tight because they have to turn to make that corner. And any boat, the 2 80-foot boats there, back out and they turn in towards the narrower side of that, not the wide side, because they're trying to get out of the harbor. And also, right at that same intersection, you've got the yacht club boat traffic coming into their docks, so they're taking wide turns right in that same vicinity. You did the view lengths if someone's coming in around the corner on that Galveston wall, but you can't see if you're an SUP or a kayaker coming around that corner, and you can't see what boats are queuing up at the hoist dock there until you're around that corner. And you typically take that corner fairly tight because you don't want to get in the traffic lanes. So if you get If you get, and that's a great picture of it, if you get a boat coming out, a boat coming in, and 2 SUPers, that is already a jam-packed fairway. It is very narrow in there. I can tell you, I got pictures from the yacht club, from when I got video from me coming out there. People want distance from from the parked boats, so they're not right up against those docked boats. They're out a ways, and it just continues to constrict that. So that is a very tight fairway. And if you look at the marina design guidelines put out by the Department of Boating and Waterways, it says boat launching facilities should be designed and constructed in accordance with the technical publication. But it says, let's see, where is it? Here. Should be located so as to minimize conflicts in vehicle and boat traffic as well as boater use patterns. This is one of the most used corners in the harbor, and it does this design does not take that into accommodation. Somebody spoke about taxing residents. I haven't heard of any taxes under any scenario. Talked about the parking structure facade. That's being fixed right now as we speak. And pier maintenance, even under the waterfront agreement, that was a responsibility, repairing the wooden fishing piers, both the sport fishing pier and the existing piece that's in the project, were the cost of the city. Am I not correct?
Correct.
Okay. I also want to, somebody talked about approving a location. I don't think we're on tap tonight to approve a location. We're on tap for the public and for us to opine on the different alternatives. So I don't think that's our mandate. I do want to foot stomp, and I've talked with some of the public safety officials, that every single public safety official who patrols that harbor on a daily basis, and some recently retired ones who feel free to speak, voiced vociferous discontent or opposition to this location. And all of them said C and D are the better locations. And we heard one of the recently retired harbor masters opine that Mole D was the safest, but it was taken off the table. It was never considered and never asked of them. Talked about the smallest possible location. That one chart showed the footprint. I think that's a testimony that we're trying to pack too much into one mole, a very well-used mole already. And so I don't think that's proper. We should be spreading out the uses so we're not impacting access. Somebody brought up parks versus open space. If you read the Coastal Commission's opinion or response, it wasn't that they were saying public parkland was setting the precedent. It's the definition of public open space as parking and the top of revetment. So it's this is not zoned a park. Moonstone Park is not zoned park. So the Coastal Commission requirement was that it be 33% passive public open space, and that's what they have problems with, is that we're talking the top of the revetment and parking spaces as being considered public open space, and they consider it a dangerous precedent for other harbors up and down the coast. And again, that points to we're trying to cram too many uses into a too small space. As to queuing access, I think one of the concerns on Mole B that we keep coming back to is if you're queued up all the way down that mole, you're blocking other boaters from their uses of the facility. You may be parking somebody in that needs to leave, in fact. Noise. There's more liveaboards in this portion of the harbor than at C and D. There's no liveaboards on the outside of Mole C and D. So the noise for liveaboards is much worse in this location than Mole C or D. If we look at maneuvering space, there's no question C and D have far, far, far more maneuvering space than this crammed facility. Aesthetics, there's a thing in the EIR that talks about aesthetics and rates them. If you put a boat ramp at Mole D, you are saving views from Zuliger Park, which is another one of the concerns from the Coastal Commission, is how much of the views are you blocking from Zuliger Park. You keep Mole D free from multi-story development if you put a boat ramp there. Our LCP says that all of the existing slips within the harbor will be maintained, enhanced, and preserved. This gets rid of 39 boat slips, many of them large. And those are already have a waiting list. Large slips have a waiting list for them today. And the city has never demonstrated how you replace those large slips. It's not part of the project, and you can't bet on a future fix when you approve something like this. So we're violating our LCP. The hoist, somebody brought up the hoist, and I support putting a hoist in. If we go to Mold D, you can put a hoist. You can keep the current hoist. You don't have to eliminate it, and you don't have to build a new one. And somebody brought up the workshop, and I think that was Mark. That's really what should be happening here. Ever since Mole B was presented, we've had 3 minutes to comment on it. I was one of the residents on that. And that is a lot different than a workshop where you get to sit around the table and really talk about the pros and cons and how you can properly configure a site. So I would strongly recommend that our group push for a real workshop on this to reopen it up, and especially if the city's stuck on staying with Mole B. We should afford that the same level of scrutiny and discussion that we did the other sites. That's all I have for now. Thanks for bearing with me on that lengthy list of comments.
Thank you, Commissioner Light. Commissioner Kilroy?
I'm back.
Commissioner Keidser?
Yes, okay. So I agree with Commissioner Light. I would really have liked to have had that PowerPoint as part of my package. I think that there are times when we get PowerPoints that have information that would have been very useful ahead of time. I can tell you right now, I know in my files somewhere, I have designs on Mold D that don't look like that. In fact, I don't know that I've ever seen that gigantic one before. I can't say I haven't, but I don't believe I have. When I saw it, I was a little surprised by it. So, and that came out of the the 8 public workshops that we had. I mean, I think there were 8, at least 8 of them. And they had everyone from the boating community, everyone from the non-boating community. You had people in there getting, rolling up their sleeves and drawing, designs. Everybody commenting, well, that doesn't work for this group, and this doesn't work for this group. And it really was a good way to do it. And I agree that maybe a workshop is probably a better way to deal with with all the alternatives. Because they were focused mainly on Mole C and D before A and B ever came up. B was eliminated in the EIR because of safety reasons, so nobody ever talked about it until the very last minute at a commission meeting. It was just kind of thrown in. So, and I'm already on the record with my displeasure at that in prior meetings. Speaking purely about Mole B, I think it is concerning, and I think that the Coastal Commission is on the right track. It is the only option. Sorry, I was really loud earlier, and I'm very loud. Mole B is the only option that eliminates slips at this point. And not only does it eliminate slips, but it has also been pointed out that it eliminates any consideration of masked up dry storage on Mole B, which was considered and approved by the City Council in the Mole B master plan. So you're not only eliminating current slips, but you're eliminating small boat, the ability to thrive in small boats, which is really what we want in a harbor. So that's a concern. Going to public access. Okay, traffic. I've beat this to death about traffic and how the EIR I thought was woefully insufficient, unrealistic on that. From the water side, this is the busiest end of the harbor. You are putting as much traffic as humanly possible in the same spot. You've got boats, SUPs, you've got kayaks, you've got, power boats, sailboats, big and large. You've got kids in dinghies that are going around without engines and just tacking up that harbor. I don't know if for people who aren't boaters, my slip used to be way down in C, down that whole basin on Sea Dock. And when I didn't have an engine or my engine wasn't working or when I was learning, I tacked up that entire basin. So you have boats going like, anybody who knows tacking, boats can't sail into the wind. So you have boats tacking out of that, both big and small. And that is just not, it might look big with those teeny little boats drawn in, but the reality is it's not. I go down that basin all the time, and once you pass that baffle wall, you're not turning around. Sailboats go very, very slow. And when you're going that slow, you can't just spin around like you can in a car. It takes a lot of maneuverability, and you can't do that, especially if there's traffic, especially if you're turning around and then going into the wind. So it just doesn't work. I mean, it really doesn't. If you've got a power boat, all of a sudden they have to go into reverse, that doesn't work because it's, again, not enough room in there for maneuverability if they've got an SUP or a sailboat coming in behind them. From the landside traffic, it also doesn't work in the sense that you have one lane each way, and the people who have their boats on Mole B basically are going to get stuck in parking spaces when there's a queuing lane behind them, and they're going to be hurting for parking because all the trailers are going to take up that parking. If the single-use cars do take up the parking, then the people who are trying to park their trailers don't have parking for themselves. So mixed-use parking doesn't work for this kind of development. I think that you also have to consider the fact that cars with trailers with boats on them are going to be traveling down Harbor Drive and turning right or left onto Mole B, which is very difficult, especially with the cycle track there. Again, in just my little sports car, turn down that mole to go to Blue Water, and I have to, practically turn myself around in my car just to look at bicyclists and runners and people skateboarding coming down the cycle track. That is a bad intersection, second only to the intersection on Mole A, which is Harbor Drive and Hermosa Avenue, which we've all been complaining about for years, at least since I've been on the Harbor Commission. You've got Mole C, which has direct access from Beryl, and I think that is the best option as far as landside traffic goes. Mole C also allows for a dedicated queuing lane, and I believe Mole D does also. You won't be blocking emergency vehicle, you won't be blocking recreational boater vehicles. I understand on Mole C there was a slide that said that the street is 33 feet wide. Well, typically aren't lanes 11 feet each? Isn't that the standard traffic lane width?
Commissioner, you prefer 12 as a minimum, and 15 is preferred.
But on the highway, aren't they not 11?
No, they're 12 or 15.
Are they?
Yeah.
Okay, I read somewhere that they were 11. I think that was in the EIR, actually. Okay, so I will go find that, too.
I think that's Harbor Drive isn't Harbor Drive now 11?
Somewhere in a commission meeting or a packet that 11 was the, maybe it was with the cycle track redrawing. Regardless, I read in one of our things here that if you picture an in and out line, that's what you're going to have here on Mole B. You're going to have people blocked until everyone gets through and gets their burgers. Parking, I think we've, again, beat that to I do like the idea of shifting the lagoon one way or the other. I never really considered shifting it the other way to make more room on the other side of Seaside Lagoon. That would be a pretty easy shift to allow for more parking and more accommodation and queuing lanes. So I have a lot of notes. I share the Coastal Commission's concern about clustering all the boating in one end of the harbor. Just makes for more waterside traffic. Safety is a huge issue. I have grave concerns that despite expressed concerns by our own harbor patrol officers, as well as attorneys who represent public entities and attorneys who don't, and the vast majority of boaters who are the people who are going to be using this, that safety is a problem. And I think we're just asking for trouble because all of these minutes are going to be Exhibit A to the first personal injury lawsuit. I think this point, that kind of hits all my comments. I would like to see us, as a commission, recommend to City Council that they submit an application for a boat ramp on either C or D or both to see which one comes out ahead. And I'd like to refer our comments back to City Council. I believe that's a motion that we can make. And I'd like them to have our comments. And I do believe that this is ripe for a public workshop as opposed to simply a public hearing where everyone gets their 3 minutes with us not having real interaction other than they state their piece and we say our opinions. And that would be the volume of my comments.
All right. Always come back.
Oh, I'm
Yeah,
sure
more.
I'm sure I will.
Commissioner Scherer?
Oh, a lot of logical comments. I think this. A lot of logical comments. Commissioner Light, thank you for that, and Commissioner Keidser. I think we should really consider a lot of the notes that were mentioned. I don't know why we're still talking about Mole B. Frankly, I've always voiced my concern about B, and I've always said C is not that much better either. And A being complicated for so many different reasons, D was not on the table. And one of Commissioner Light's comments is if on C, we are trying to, I think it was D, we're trying to comply with Measure C, but not on the others, or not with the others. What happens if we treat D and C for the analysis purpose in the same manner, where we're not complying with Measure C to see if the impact apples to apples can, or what that would yield, and switch the focus on to other logical options? But as I've mentioned in the past, I still don't understand how we can make a decision on a Measure C or a D or any other measure for that matter without looking at the big picture of what the waterfront project would look like, be it Center Cal or be it anybody else, be it the current proposal or any other proposal. I still don't know how you can make a decision on where the boat ramp would be without seeing what the impact would be on the land uses and the land distribution of how to maximize the use in an efficient way. So we're still talking about making a decision on something that we don't know how it's going to impact the future of our waterfront. Mark mentioned a workshop. This should have been a workshop. And we're not going to be able to resolve any of these challenges and issues by going this back and forth thing as opposed to actually being interactive, which could really save everybody time. So to the extent we can have one workshop before any decision decisions are made and recommendations sent to the commission, I think that would be productive. We can always look back at it and say, we had that discussion as a collective group in a workshop environment where everybody provided input. But we got to have other people on the table as well who are involved with the redevelopment of the waterfront. Again, be it Center Cal or be it anybody else. I think that would be a balance, would yield to a balanced solution, maybe would yield to some compromise, and maybe the ramp won't be quite as, the ramp and parking and services won't be quite as elaborative, but it'll yield to something that we don't have access to today based on the information we have.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Callahan?
Well, Jim Light took the wind out of my sails with most of his comments.
Sorry.
And that's okay. It's nice to hear somebody else talk. And Commissioner Keidser took the honk out of my traffic issues, both on the water and on land. I do want to bring up one point regarding water traffic. The public has this perception that boats turn on a dime and they stop instantly. They don't have any brakes. And when you're moving at bare steerage, which is the 5 miles an hour down the fairway, you don't have a lot of control. And to try and get out of the way of boats that don't know the rules of the road or paddle boarders who think that you do have brakes, it makes it really difficult. And I was just out in a kayak over the weekend, and I watched people challenge boats that were underway that couldn't move. And, you know, you always kind of do this. hoping that nothing's going to happen. You know, I don't know why Mole C or Mole D wasn't pushed a little harder in the beginning. Whether it was the lease at Joe's Crab Shack or Portofino who didn't want it, but I think those are the two best options, and I think a workshop is in order. And that's my comments.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner Callahan. You know, I had a few points to make.
Do you want me to make my shots first?
Let me go first. And then
Matter, man.
on the issue of Mole C and Mole D, the issue of surge is a concern. It's a big concern. And John, you mentioned damage to the launch facilities, physical damage. It's also a safety concern when you're trying to put a boat on a boat trailer and you've got surge. You know, that's a 3,000-pound boat or bigger moving with the ocean. You got the wind blowing against you. They can swing. They can go the wrong way. And I think, from my personal experience, that's a big safety concern for boaters. If you've got an area that's subject to surge and you're trying to launch or retrieve boats in there, and I think that's a big concern with C and D. And that's why a breakwater, in my opinion, is got to be a requirement for personal safety for boaters launching and retrieving. And you could have boaters launch, you know, and then the weather turned bad, they got to get out of the harbor somehow. And I've had boats turn sideways. I mean, I've done that in surge. It's tricky. So don't forget about that. One of the reasons why Mole B, and I know there's a lot of people not in favor of it, is nice is it's quietest waters in the harbor. It's not subject to that surge that you have at Mole C and Mole D. I know it eliminates slips, but it also adds a lot of recreational boating access, and there's a trade-off there. There is a traffic light, you know, at the Blue Water Grill. I've gone through that bike path. They've improved it a lot. They do stop. They have lights now for those bikes that go through there, and it seems to be working pretty well. Last few times I've gone through there, they do stop, and they do. My experience. I'm just saying there's a traffic light there, and it seems to be working fairly well from my experience. With respect to Joe's Crab Shack, maybe, Director, if you could elaborate us, where does that stand? That's a viable...
Sure. As you heard as part of the public testimony and may have heard independently, the company that holds the Joe's Crab Shack portfolio, Ignite, has filed for bankruptcy. As part of that process, one of the things that they were doing were looking for buyers for their portfolio. So they had what was called a stalking horse bid, which was an initial bid that was made for the portfolio. And then there was a subsequent purchase of the portfolio by Landry's, which interestingly enough was the company that owned Joe's Crab Shack in Redondo Beach before it was sold to Ignite. So essentially it was sold back to the company that had it previously. We were in contact with the folks who were handling the bankruptcy proceedings. I think the feedback we were getting was they were more interested in sort of addressing the matters at hand with the portfolio and the disposition of the portfolio. There were, as Mr. Solomon has indicated, many locations that were closed. I don't know all the circumstances. Some of the news reports that I read regarding some of those locations where they were locations that had either leases that were pending to expire or about to expire. I don't know of many situations where they had term on the lease, such as what we have, as well as options to extend, which Joe's has under their lease.
What are those
and
terms?
those options are, Joe's Crab Shack has a term that runs through 2020, and then they have 2 5-year options to extend at their discretion. So they can extend their lease term to 2030. So that would be the point at which their lease would expire. We also now have a contact with the new Landry's owners, and so we will be talking with them to see if there's any interest in doing something with that site. But I can tell you, to date, they are current. This is not a site where they have a large outstanding debt on the site. They're current in the rent that they owe the city. We think Redondo Beach is probably an attractive location for them in terms of the Joe's Crab Shack location, but we certainly will be exploring opportunities to see whether that site could be acquired or whether they are interested in just releasing themselves from the obligation of the lease as part of the bankruptcy proceedings. So too early to know the answer to that, but we're trying to ascertain the answer to some of those questions right now.
What's your sense of it right now? Is it?
I mean, my sense is it's not a site that had a lot of debt on it. I mean, it was not something that was, where they were having to relieve themselves of a lot of pressure on that site. I think it's an attractive location, but it's hard to say. I mean, they're going to probably sit down and assess their portfolio of properties that they've acquired, and some have already closed, as was indicated, so they'll look at those and then they'll try to make a determination as to if there's any others they'd like to close. And how they might want to proceed forward. But I don't have any insight right now as to how they're viewing their operation on a go-forward basis.
You have some insight as to what it would take to buy them out as far as capital?
Hard to say. At one point I tried to run some back-of-the-envelope numbers, and I thought the number was somewhere between $4 and $6 million, just based on what we know they were earning in terms of revenues from the site. Just kind of a quick guesstimate. That may or may not be accurate.
Yeah.
And again, desperate times, sometimes people are willing to, relieve themselves of some obligations and take less than that. So
they're losing money, yes.
If they're losing money, yeah. But I mean, we went on what we get, because Joe's Crab Shack is a direct tenant of ours, we have indications of what they earn on a regular basis. So if you just took some sort of a margin that you thought they might be earning and applied that over the term of the lease, you could make some kind of a rough estimate of what you thought the value of the lease might be. But until you sit down at the negotiating table with somebody, it's hard to know exactly what they might be willing to dispose of the property for. Okay. So I think as they come out of all of the bankruptcy processes, we'll have more of an opportunity, and they kind of come up for air, and they've got the portfolio in front of them to sit down and talk with them about the future of Joe's Crab Shack in Redondo Beach.
All right. Well, thanks for that clarification. The point I was making on the break wall is very expensive. That's, I think, a $9-10 million item also. And we're getting to the point where I don't know if Redondo Beach can afford all of this, including the buyout, the ramp itself. We've just seen City Council dedicate $5 million to replacing the short pier. And I don't know what our budget status is right now on the Tideland funds, but
so the most recent data that we have on our Tidelands Fund, and we had a conversation about this, is if you just looked at what the Tidelands Fund has in cash and cash equivalents, the most recent information that we have on that is the CAFR that was prepared at the end of 2016. The 2017 document is in production right now. But if you just looked at that number, there was roughly $16.7 million in the Tidelands Fund in cash and cash equivalents. Now, there are liabilities that are booked against that, but we believe that you could use that as a working number to see what you had in terms of cash available to take on some of the projects. As I indicated in some of our previous conversations, if you take the super conservative approach, we would be paying for all of it out of those reserves. We are going to certainly look for opportunities to find grant funding, to find opportunities to do revenue enhancements that could offset some of those costs. So I don't know that the sport fishing pier is going to hit us for the full price, but we haven't gone out and done that work yet, so I can't tell you what those dollars might mean. But if you just looked at it from the pure conservative perspective and charged it all against the Tidelands Fund, we've estimated that sport fishing pier between $4 to $6 million.
All right, thank you. So 16.7 million is where we're at right now.
Yeah, and we'll have as I said, we'll have an adjustment to that once we have the latest report, and we'll bring that back to you and let you know what that number is, because there have been some charges against that for capital improvements that were part of the current budget cycle. So that number has decreased a little bit as a result of that, but we may have some add backs as a result of fund balances that have accrued. So once the books close for this past fiscal year, we can come back and give you a more accurate accounting of the cash and cash equivalents.
Okay. At a future meeting. Yes. And I guess my last point was being a boater. The boaters, trailer boaters, they queue up in the morning. They are there early in the morning and they launch, so 6 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the morning is when the boat queue, there will be a boat queue of trailers, but it'll be early in the morning. At that time, hopefully everybody can get along and not block access. And then they trickle back during the afternoon, so it's a surge early in the morning and then trickle back later on. That's my comments. Commissioner Kilroy?
Yeah, sorry I didn't go during my scheduled turn, but I was busy still making notes. It's been stated before, all the moles have their pluses and minuses, some more than others. I don't think anyone here is jumping up and down and put it on mole A. I had issues with mole C, in part because I didn't think it was fair to Portofino to negatively impact a viable ongoing business. I also have a major issue with putting wave attenuation in the middle of the turning basin. When you talk about accidents, that's an accident waiting to happen. I could just see somebody coming in at night, running right into that. However, back in my tenure on the city council, Mole D came up, and it was actually presented to us for a vote. At the time, it's kind of funny because I believe the number was about 39 parking spaces, and there was a big discussion as the circulation pattern in that parking lot. Let's just say it wasn't very good. And my conversation with Councilmember Chris Cagle was waiting until we had control over a larger piece of the marina area property, which obviously now we do. Even as going back 3 or 4 years ago, even when Center Cal was having their discussion about their layout, my preferred location was the south side of Seaside Lagoon because we had the property, it was ours. And there was talk about wave attenuation from the south breakwater and possibly extending that south breakwall. Now, I'm not a wave expert, so, obviously somebody would have to come and say whether that was viable, how much impact it would have, whether you could do a wave wall as part of the boat ramp itself. But like I said, I'm not in favor of putting a wave attenuation wall in the turning basin itself. I think that itself is problematic. I will also say I don't think Mole B, if a boat ramp goes there, and I still think it can be a viable alternative. As we've talked about, it's the calmest water. It's got its pros and cons with regards to the traffic side, but I do not think you can mix uses. I do not think you can put hand launch and trailer launch at Mole B. I agree with what's been said about too many uses all in one spot. That, I think, it's obvious to me anyway. I would separate them at Mole D. I wouldn't have them together. If I could wave a magic wand, I'd acquire Joe's Crab Shack. I'd move Seaside Lagoon farther towards Mole C, and I would have the traffic come right down, as was mentioned. Burl, cross Portofino, minimizing, making it easier for boats and trailers to cross Harbor Drive. Hang a left, and you'd have a long queuing lane that basically was the width of Seaside Lagoon. I would think it would be adequate. Yes, would it kind of separate commercial development in the harbor? Yeah, but to me, Seaside Lagoon was always public open space to begin with and was never part of a commercial development in my mind. It was public open space. But like I said, I think Mole B still has some advantages. You're not going to get more peaceful water to launch a boat into. I do think the traffic side is viable. But if I could wave my wand, my first choice had always been, and it's not really Mole D, it's not really Mole C, it's kind of in between the two. It literally is when you look at that map, and it probably means Polly's on the pier, that pier doesn't get rebuilt because that's right where pretty much you'd put the boat ramp. Maybe a little bit more towards Mole C, but right in that area. it's a little side note, but piers in my mind are like shopping centers, freebie giveaways or for sale items. They're a loss leader. They're something that get people to come down to a location. You're never going to make money at it. And you're never going to make the $5 million it's going to cost to replace that pier, in my opinion. We've got a pier. We've got a great pier. I just don't know we need that one. So, again, I don't have a problem with going forward with Mole B. My recommendation, and actually I'd even entertain a motion to recommend to the City Council to have a concurrent application. Because at the end of the day, I think the Coastal Commission is going to be the one making the decision. So I don't think it really hurts us to have a concurrent application to the city, to the Coastal Commission. I call it Mole C and a half, or call it, I mean, you make the motion any way you want, or second it if somebody wants to. Had a couple council members supporting it. I know there's still questions up in the air as to what that application would look like and whether we would try to make it fit some Measure C or not, but that can all be, I think, can be worked out in some of the details. As the question with Joe's Crab Shack, I'm probably not a big fan of going back to another public workshop. What I see happening, I hate to say it, in public workshops, as with all the Center Cal workshops, everybody puts their 2 cents in, and then at the end of the day, somebody decides which of those things they like to put in the final draft. We saw it with Center Cal. Or you try to do too many things at once. I mean, there's been so much discussion with regards to the boat ramp. It's, have you seen from the historical context, we've gone round and round, and we've had some great discussions here with regards to it. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. I have no problem continuing to support the boat ramp at B as long as it doesn't include hand launch. And I have no problem going also with a concurrent application for Mole C and a half.
Commissioner Light?
Yes, do you have an idea what the TOT and sales tax is from the harbor area?
I don't off the top of my head.
So what we get from the harbor enterprise is lease and the parking revenues, correct?
That's correct. Most of the revenues that we receive are lease proceeds, and then revenues that we collect from the parking structures and the surface
But
parking
certainly
lots.
there's sales tax and TOT generated from the harbor area.
Absolutely.
That aren't in any of those numbers.
That's correct.
Okay.
That all accrues to the city's general fund.
Okay. I still get stuck on this one LCP requirement. I don't know if you've all read it, but it very clearly says all existing boating and boat-related facilities will be maintained, enhanced, and preserved, and where possible, expanded. Yeah. Then it follows up, all of the existing slips within the harbor area will be maintained, enhanced, and preserved. And yet we're eliminating 39 and ignoring, we're saying we're complying with the LCP when clearly that's a direct violation. And there's other ones we can find too, but that's the most obvious one. As to Joe's Crab Shack, I'm just shocked that after, I've been following the Center Cal thing from when they first picked Center Cal, and from the very start, we've been talking Mole C, Mole C, Mole C, Mole C, Mole C. Then all of a sudden, right at the very end, after the DEIR was published, boom, all of a sudden we flip-flopped. For some reason, for all those years, Joe's Crab Shack and the cost of getting that lease wasn't a consideration. Now all of a sudden it's a big deal. And I don't get, it seems like you're manufacturing the issue to get the conclusion that you want. Because for all those years, somehow it was okay. We've bought out every other leasehold in that area. But somehow now that we're considering Mole B, all of a sudden Joe's Crab Shack's lease is a problem. The surge has been there forever. It's not generally that bad. And there's plenty of designs throughout the years that haven't had a break wall internal to the harbor to accommodate it. There's several for Mold D that had no break wall. I did see something that talked about extending the south wall of the outside jetty or whatever breakwater, which that would be if you wanted to do something like that, would be the least impactful. But generally, waves for us aren't coming from very south because you get blocked by Catalina and PV Peninsula. So it's wrapping around there and it dissipates most of the energy. It's only in the worst of storms it really gets hazardous, and then that you shut down the ramp because you don't want people going out then anyway. In 2007, a committee was formed of all the stakeholders. They came out and said Mold D, and it didn't have a breakwater, and somehow they said it's in, you can look it up in the newspapers, you can look it up in the minutes. That was the safest place in the harbor to have it, and we're still quibbling with that. I'm glad that Director Proud brought up that it's not just funded out of the harbor enterprise, that if we design it right, we'll get grants from the state, and there's potentially other grants. And I did find the city minutes from that meeting that resulted in this meeting, and it says very clearly, direct staff to not respond to the California Coastal Commission incomplete application letter. And I see Councilman Nils Narenheim is out there. Nils, can you opine on that, since you were I believe you moved for that, according to the minutes.
Thank you, Commissioner Light. I was actually the motion maker on this particular situation. I actually went back and looked back at the tank real quick. At 6:19 and 40 seconds, I finished up, and I specifically stated that I wanted advice for the city council. And as the motion maker, I can tell you that the entire intent was for you guys to have these meetings, have your findings, do what you need to do, to come back to the city council for us to have another say, another whack at it before we send off that letter with more information. I for sure have a lot more information to add, but I don't want to take up your time or any of the public's time for this situation. Also, I believe in July, Mr. Proud said, I'm not sure if I can be correct, I didn't see all the video on that, but that all these two meetings would be coming back as a letter and information back to the city council without going to the Coastal Commission. And as well as Mr. Light, as you did say, I did specifically say in there that the city were not to respond to the Coastal Commission letter, incomplete application letter. And that's extremely important because responding to that letter was not the intent of the motion, not the intent of the motion maker. And I want to be exceptionally clear on that point. And the last point, Ms. Callahan, this is going to be your last meeting as well.
It is.
So Mr. Light and Mr. Callahan, you guys will be here for.
Thanks. So based on that, I'd like to make a motion to refer the results of this, after we get to see what the staff drafts, back to City Council, and specifically not to the Coastal Commission until the City Council gets to see it, and to recommend a public workshop.
Second.
Sorry, there was a motion on the table.
Yes.
Nobody seconded my motion, so it wasn't really on the table.
So it died.
I didn't mean to.
Well,
entertain it.
I wasn't.
Okay, so,
Still.
Wait.
Mr. Chairman, just for clarity, there was a motion on the table. I don't think it died, it just, nobody called for a second. I'm sorry, I'm talking now. Thank you. Another motion was made, so for clarity purpose, can we recite what the replacement motion was?
Yes, I think that's a great idea, Commissioner. If you could repeat your motion.
Sure.
And
I would like
have it clearly in the record.
I would like to move that we refer the results of this meeting, after we get to review the minutes, to City Council, and specifically not to the Coastal Commission, and that we also recommend to the City Council that we have a public workshop on boat ramp alternatives, as requested by the Coastal Commission.
Is that what you
That was my
seconded?
second.
Okay,
Could I
discussion? Yeah, let's
Yeah.
have some discussion on this.
So from staff, my question is, so if you have a workshop, what's the timetable to respond to the Coastal Commission? And is it likely that any input from a citizens workshop would be timely to be included in the response, if that makes sense?
So the letter that we received for the incomplete application does not have a defined response date. So, as we sit here, and we received that letter at the very end of March, I believe it was dated March 30th. So we had started to prepare a response to that letter. It was during the time that we were preparing that response that the request was made that you hold these 2 commission hearings. There's no timetable associated with that. The only thing I can tell you is I do know that the Coastal Commission has 2 other related items that I believe they'd like to hear all 3 at the same time. So just as a point of consideration, they have notified us that they have a complete application for the consideration of Measure C. The city has submitted our responses to the incomplete letter for the waterfront project, and so the only outstanding piece of information that they need, if they want to consider all 3 pieces together, would be the response to this incomplete application letter for the boat ramp.
And that
So
response is what you sent us.
And at the request of the chair, I did send you, not related to the agenda tonight, but just so you had it in your files, what was submitted to the Coastal Commission as part of the waterfront project. So, so I guess my first answer is there's not a defined date by which we need to respond. We'll respond when we're prepared to respond, is probably the easiest way to address that. Your second question is a little more difficult regarding what we may learn in a public workshop.
Let me ask a different question. How long would it take to set up a public workshop and compile the results? I mean, because I think it's important that we move the process forward. And quite frankly, we've heard from a lot of people, a lot of great people, and have had their input. It's all part of the public record. I want to make sure we're moving forward, let's put it that way. So how long would it actually take to add a public workshop into the agenda, so to speak?
I think we'd have to obviously schedule it. We'd have to develop the content and then hold the workshop itself. What is that, 4 to 6 weeks maybe at the most, to probably do that, I'm guessing. John will have to prepare some more materials, maybe drop a few more alternatives. But that seems like a reasonable time period. Then you'd have that information back in terms of what you do with it. I think your comment earlier is now that you have that info, what do we do with that?
So I'd support the motion, but I don't think it needs to go back to us. I think it needs to go to the city council. I don't know how that.
I think that is the motion, isn't it?
Well, I wanted to see the minutes. I wanted this board to approve the minutes to make sure they accurately reflect the comments.
Because that could easily end up making it take 2 months. By the time, 5, 6 weeks to set up, and then it ends up being not our October meeting, it ends up being our November meeting, and then the city council, and it just, to
If
me,
you're going to have a public workshop, it's going to take that long anyway.
well, not if it goes directly to the city, not if the content of the public workshop, the output of the public workshop is presented directly to the city council. I mean, I think we've kicked this thing around.
Maybe I said, maybe I misled. I don't mean for the workshop to come back here. I meant for the minutes to this meeting to go to the council.
Oh, okay, no, I agree
After
with
you
that.
guys.
But the output from the workshop goes directly to the city council.
That's fine with me.
Okay.
I didn't make I didn't specify there.
That's fine. I think that's important because I think it saves 4 weeks off the whole.
Yeah, Director, I had a comment here. I mean, we're here to support the mayor and the city council. What comes out of this meeting, doesn't it go back to the mayor and city council? Or is the position that what comes out of this meeting is going to go to the coastal commission without getting approval from the mayor and the city council?
So
maybe I'm getting confused here, but I'd like to know.
As Councilmember Nierenheim said, it was his intent that the information would go back to the council.
Yeah.
I think we need to decide what that format is, whether that was going to be an agendized item by which this would be reported back. It was my impression, having been at the original hearing and then watching the tape again, that wasn't what was requested. But you've heard Councilmember Nierenheim express what he intended as part of his motion. I think that would be to the rest of the city council as to terms of what they want to do with the information. Our absent any other direction from the council would have been to do as as Commissioner Light has suggested, which would be we would forward the minutes from both the previous public hearing as well as this public hearing to the city council so that they would have access to those minutes. Those minutes would be attached to a response letter, and that response letter would be sent to the California Coastal Commission as part of our application response for the incomplete application for Mole B.
But that'd be agendized and voted upon by the city council, right? And discussed at the city council anyway.
If they, my understanding is that that is not what the motion was, and I think there may have to be a referral to staff to actually have that be agendized. That may be a conversation that needs to happen between the city manager and the city council as to whether that was the intent of the original motion or not.
I would think it'd be prudent, yeah. So I would support that also, that we provide this feedback to city council. And a workshop, I mean, we've been through a lot of workshops. One more won't hurt.
And it's in.
Have a new idea, C and a half.
If I may comment,
Sure.
I think
Commissioner Sharon.
one more won't hurt, but it has to be a productive workshop. It's a workshop. It's not another one of those presentations. We want to move the process along. We want to do what you said. It's been logical. We have to have the stakeholders sitting at that workshop. We have to have Portofino Hotel sitting there. We have to have people against the waterfront sitting there. We have to have Center Cal sit there, and everybody sits and try and figure out the best location for the waterfront. Because we may end up designing, based on feedback from all the boaters, a phenomenal boat ramp that would be in the middle of that entire development that would just make it so unreasonable for both the actual development of it and financially for the city and for the future builders, developers. Again, whether you support the waterfront or not, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm suggesting is we have to have all the stakeholders sitting there working together, trying to find that right balance. So when the recommendations go to city council and eventually to the commission, it would be inclusive of input from all different stakeholders.
Yeah.
Very good. Thank you, Commissioner.
So I'm not averse to that, but you can invite them, you can't force them. So if they don't want to play, you can't make them. The one thing I do think that's important in this workshop is now we can see what the Coastal Commission's concerns are. And the public can see that and then opine based on that, whether they like a Mole B or not. But that's new data that the public hasn't seen. And actually, we've not presented it very well here. What are the specific concerns of the Coastal Commission that they've come back to us on in either of these two hearings? And I think that's an important thing to bring out at the workshop.
Okay,
Just a quick
go ahead.
comment on you can invite them, but you can't force them to attend. As I said earlier, we had at least 8 public workshops where everyone got together. Center Cal was there, active in trying to design both the development plus the boat ramp. From a boating perspective, Mole D is the obvious place. Obviously, it interfered with the development. Mole C turned out to be an acceptable alternative for everybody. It was like pretty much a done deal on Mole C. And then all of a sudden, it was going to be devastating to Portofino's business. So I don't know where they were during those 8 public workshops, but I would encourage anybody who has a say on the boat ramp to be at that workshop, because I think it goes a long way when it's consistent, as opposed to all that work and then one person says, oh, by the way, this is going to be devastating to my business. So I would highly recommend that anybody who has any stakeholder be at that workshop.
Well, my 2 cents. The Coastal Commission has a stake in this, and we're designing around things that they laid down years ago, like 33% park open space. If we come up with something that they don't like, I mean, they're ultimately going to decide this. So what I was going to ask at this meeting is, what about trade-offs with the Coastal Commission? If we can give them open space elsewhere, is that on the table? I don't know if you've had dialogue with them to that extent or not, but we want to come up with something that goes through smoothly, and we know our harbor pretty well, but I don't want to come up with something that the Coastal Commission is going to shoot down either.
Yeah, we haven't had that specific conversation. I do know that they feel strongly about the open space on Mulby and Moonstone Park in the conversations that we've had. I think that's important to them. So, you know, and I actually believe that's memorialized in a couple of locations. So
They can't change our zoning, they can only suggest.
yeah, so having the application in front of them is one way to get feedback. You know, if you were to prepare a concurrent application, that would be another way to get feedback. They would have two options in front of them and could give you feedback on either one of those. So, I mean, I think we have tested the waters as much as we can at the staff level, but what happens when it ultimately gets to their commissioners and their decision makers is another question. So, you know, you could certainly make that recommendation as well if you wanted to prepare a current ramp. If the thought is that you wanted to do a workshop first, you could do that. I mean, I think these are all
I didn't include it in my motion, is I want to hear the results of the workshop before we move to do something like that.
And this is all going to be a recommendation, I presume, to the city council, so they will do with that recommendation what they will.
Exactly.
Call for a vote.
Any more discussion, commissioners? Motion on the table has been seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Very good.
So I did have one other motion, and I don't know, maybe you're not in favor of it now, but the motion was to recommend to City Council that a concurrent application be submitted for Mole C/D, some combination in between, whatever. And I don't, after the results of the workshop are fine, but I don't see a problem with us making a recommendation to the council now that they proceed with a concurrent application.
To prepare one or actually submit it?
Submit it. I'd second that.
Prepare one after they get results from the workshop. Prepare and submit, yes, prepare and submit. Why prepare if you're not going to submit?
Well,
But, yes, prepare and submit after the results of the workshop. Because I think you've got two council members at least who had previously stated their support for it. It, to me, makes a lot of sense, again, to move forward, to have more than one iron in the fire, and to get more feedback from the Coastal Commission as to what they're looking for. I don't know. I just can't see a bad thing about it.
Do you want to amend?
So that's my motion.
Well, I think we're too late, we voted on that.
You
so-
can always amend.
No, we voted on yours. This is a new motion.
He's suggesting we amend it.
Well, you can ask for a friendly amendment. Did I get a second?
I second it.
got
Okay,
a second,
so you
yeah.
could ask for a friendly amendment, and myself and the second have to agree to it. Did you have an amendment you wanted to make?
Me? No.
Yeah.
No, he's saying
It's your
yours is the
amendment.
amendment to mine.
Oh, no,
just
mine's
an
a separate
addition.
motion.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
So are we in discussion on that?
yeah, let's definitely have some discussion.
So, I'm torn on this. I think it's premature to say where I'm not sure how we ask city council to make prepare a submission before we know what the results of the workshop might be. It's hard.
Well, that's why we left it a little broad, saying C or D,
Or C and a half.
or C and a half, somewhere between there. How can you?
Why wouldn't we just let the coastal commission weigh in on B if we ever submit finalize the application and then go from there?
Because their opinion on B might be affected one way or the other by a concurrent application. If they see that there's a better alternative, they might not
Well,
have to go
there's-
through all the rigmarole of,
Well-
is this loss of slips acceptable when we have an option here that has no loss of
So
slips?
if I'm correct, depending on what we'd opine, we'd have to go all the way back to the EIR stage, right? I mean, you can't presuppose that it won't be an EIR impact at this point till we know what the recommendation is. I mean, there's a whole lot to,
We can't, although, we're not necessarily obligated to analyze every single nuance of every alternative. I think we're not likely going to stray too far afield from unless we completely do something really radical with I think if we were to start to talk about moving Seaside Lagoon to a new location and then proposing a ramp in a different location, that's probably beyond what we looked at in the EIR. If we're talking about variants of mole C or mole D that largely look like what we analyzed, then we probably have sufficient coverage from what we did from an EIR perspective. So I think it just depends on how far afield we drift from what was analyzed in the EIR.
An application to the Coastal Commission is pretty involved, too.
It is. I mean, that's work on our part to prepare a whole new application. What I understood the question to be, would it also require some additional support from an EIR perspective, an environmental review
I was
perspective?
definitely asking that.
And I think it depends on,
what we come
up with.
And what about, I mean, if it impacts, it would likely, unless we come up with exactly what was in the EIR and the DEIR measure on mole C, it's likely to impact the application for the waterfront, too.
Yeah, I think it could. Now, the application is a standalone application, so our intent had always been that the boat ramp application was separate and apart from the waterfront application.
Right, but if you put it in the same place that you've put the market hall, that's a substantial difference.
Well, that would affect both applications pretty significantly. I mean, now you're talking about an entirely different waterfront project. So, yeah, if it was a mole D location, then, it would still be its own standalone boat ramp application.
Well, even a C&1/2, if we didn't build the sport fishing pier, that's a different.
That would be a different application as well.
So.
But isn't that more of a reason to have a concurrent application? Because if they approve the Center Cal development as it is written now, that eliminates any possibility of D or of mid-C.
Unless I'm wrong, they said they don't intend to do that, because they realize, and they tied it together, if you went down to that meeting, they tied the two together because they realized if they approved the waterfront project, they were limiting where they could put the boat ramp, and they know that that's a requirement, and that there's a lot of, obviously, issues around where the boat ramp gets located.
Point of clarification real quick, I wanted to ask legal, a motion was made and passed, and so under Robert's rules, that particular item is dead. This is a new item being discussed, it's not agendized, and so therefore, we can't discuss this, this will be under referral to staff. And to your point, Commissioner Gilroy, it is true that two of the council members did say that, but that particular motion was denied.
So is that true? We're beyond our purview?
There is no legal representation at this hearing, so I'm not sure what the legal question is.
I understand what the question is. The question is, does our agenda cover that motion, is really what the question is. Yeah.
Yeah, my personal feeling is I'd feel better if we waited till after the workshop before we recommended, preparing another application. That's a lot of work. We put in a lot of work. These workshops are a lot of work.
I'm torn because I see both sides.
Yeah.
Gray area.
I'll withdraw my
put it in
motion
later.
just to be on the safe legal side from a Brown Act violation of doing something on, voting on something that wasn't necessarily properly agendized, but at the proper time, I'd like to make a staff recommendation then that it is properly agendized for our for the meeting after the workshop.
I second that. Is that a motion?
If I need a motion for a
withdraw it,
referral, it's a
right?
referral, it's not really a
Withdraw
motion.
it.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm good. Could I ask everybody to take a little break here? We've been up here for a while, and we need a break.
Need a break.
Man, this is not.
5-minute break, please.
Was there anything else we need to talk?
Well, I don't know if we want to close the public hearing right now.
I thought we already did.
I believe we already closed the public hearing. I believe there's
I'm
been
sorry.
a motion and a second, and it's been voted upon. Unless you have any further discussion, I believe this item has been resolved.
Are we good? So I'd like a motion to close the commission portion of the, we close our discussion period also?
You've had a motion and a vote.
Yeah.
I don't think we need to do that.
Or for the commission
I don't
discussion.
think you need to take a formal action to close your discussion. I think once you've had a motion and a vote, you can determine that you've disposed of that agenda item.
So isn't the motion then to receive and file?
You could probably have a secondary motion to receive and file the staff report. I think that would be appreciated, just so we're.
Motion to receive and file.
Second.
All approved? Aye. Thank you for everybody being patient through this. We're going to take a 5-minute break, and then we have some other items to discuss.
Can we get a soft copy of the briefing? Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
It's a big file.
absence of the sizes they're talking about and the quantities. So it's like trying to grab this much in tablets when all they need is this, because they're like more the attitude of I'm gonna grab this much because I'm gonna negotiate down. Just give the city what you want, what you really want. Come up with an awesome project.
Our 5 minutes is up.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's the problem. 5 minutes always becomes 10. But I'm glad you said 5, because if you said 10, it would be 15.
It'd be 15, yeah.
But thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. Could everybody please return?
Well, that makes things look.
Yes.
Sophomore.
Okay.
Brian?
Yes.
Okay.
Why were they trying to get
Okay.
you to accuse yourself?
Because of Measure C and the appeal.
No problem.
Too fast.
We're gonna reconvene again. If we could have a follow-up roll call, please. Aye.
Yes, Commissioner Callahan?
Present.
Commissioner Keidser?
Roll call. Yeah, we
Here.
have to
Was that me?
yes.
Commissioner Kilroy?
Here.
Commissioner Light?
Present.
Commissioner Shear?
Here.
Chair Dalton?
Here.
And Commissioner Jackson absent.
Everybody here voted.
Okay, so we're going to move on to Director's Report.
Thank you. I won't take it personally that the room cleared out as part of my the riveting director's report that I'm about to deliver here. But
This is very important to me.
I mean, I think there's some good stuff here, but others may see it differently. So what we wanted to cover tonight is a few items with you. We've got a few things to run through since we were not here in the month of August. I hope everybody enjoyed the month off and was able to get away. I certainly did and was. So it'll take us back a little ways to cover some of the things that have been approved by the council that I wanted to make sure you were aware of. At the July 18th meeting, there was a contract approved with the Meeks Company for repairs at the municipal pier, and really it was for future on-call repair services as well for the municipal and sport fishing piers. What we've been wanting to do for a while is to have an on-call service provider that could address some of the issues that arise as needed for repairs to those two facilities. As it turns out, the council subsequently decided not to make the repairs to the sport fishing pier and to move forward with the replacement of the sport fishing pier. So the Meeks contract will actually be limited to the work they're doing on the municipal pier. So that's how that will move forward. At that same meeting, they approved plans and specs for the pier parking structure elevators. That's a capital improvement project job number 70680, and authorized the city clerk to advertise that project for competitive bids. So we have constantly been struggling with maintenance of elevators in the parking garages. They're old, parts are hard to come by, so we're working on a replacement project for those, and we should have that going here pretty quickly. The meeting of the 25th of July was dedicated to commissioner interviews. The meeting of August 1st was where the city council took action regarding the sport fishing pier improvements and approved moving forward with the full reconstruction and directed Public Works to move forward with that.
Can I ask a question on that?
Sure.
Is part of that to dredge it deep enough for a tall ship to come
Well,
in,
I
or is
think
that
that's
still
going to
to
be a question that's going to have to be addressed. We actually had a pre-bid meeting today with a few contractors who may be interested. We talked about what design considerations the pier itself may need,
Right.
but then we also talked about how do we deal with the dredging issue and the draw for the tall ships. Separate and apart from the sport fishing pier project, we are having conversations about dredging in the harbor, and those
Right.
conversations are moving forward. So I would expect that'll get paired up with that conversation.
Okay.
But we'll need those to move somewhat in parallel.
But if you want something that big, you'd have to design the pier to handle it.
Agreed. And that was what we were talking about today. So
You need dredging. That thing's getting really shallow.
it is, and there and other places as well. We did have also on that August 1st lease a lease that would allow, as part of the sport fishing operation, as part of the sport fishing pier replacement project, to allow the sport fishing operation, and I think we talked about this, to move to the International Boardwalk. So they would take the space that's at 140 International Boardwalk, which used to be a store called the Optical Department, and so that's where the sport fishing operation will now sell tickets from and have their operation originate from. We think it makes some sense because they're immediately adjacent to where the sport fishing boats are in Basin 3, and it gives them a place while the sport fishing pier undergoes its replacement project. So that lease was approved by the city council. On the August 15th meeting, there was a urgency moratorium on mixed-use projects. I only bring that up to let you know that that wasn't applicable to the pier in the harbor area. That was for other areas within the city. So, but just wanted to make sure you were aware of that. And then most recently at the meeting that was held last Tuesday, there was approval of a lease for Tradewinds, who is currently a tenant on the International Boardwalk. They wanted to acquire a little space that was vacated immediately next door to them. It used to be the Redondo Smoke Shop. So the smoke shop is no longer in business on the pier, and Tradewinds is going to expand and utilize that space for their operation. So we think that's a good use for them to be in that space as well. Also, which has been brought up a couple of times, were the mayor's appointments to the boards and commissions at that hearing. For those of you who were there or watched it, it was a bit, there was some controversy attached to it. Ultimately, there were some appointments that were made. There were some appointments that weren't made. The appointments that were made were ultimately vetoed. So as we stand right now, depending on what happens with boards and commission appointments at upcoming city council meetings, I think folks have mentioned that Commissioner Light and Commissioner Callahan are the two that are right now in the
Limbo.
on the slate for discussion. So are in limbo, and we'll see how that process plays itself out. Hard to say. Upcoming city council meeting tomorrow, we do have the strategic plan meeting at 4 o'clock in the large library room. We had talked about this previously as to how often the Harbor Commission provides input to the strategic plan. We look back, and it looked like we've been providing it once a year. So the strategic plan happens at 2 instances during the year, and at least at one of those meetings, we've been soliciting the input from the Harbor Commission to put into the strategic plan. We did that as part of the March strategic plan. We'll do that again as part of the March strategic plan. So this plan will go forward without necessarily having your input, but things you had previously provided input on that were on the strategic plan that need to be carried forward would be a part of that discussion. Upcoming city council items, we have a few things that are tentative. We haven't quite nailed them down 100%. One of them is refinancing of city-owned properties. So as part of conversations related to the waterfront project, we acquired 3 leaseholds. We acquired those 3 leaseholds, and we set up a payment structure for those leaseholds. That payment structure has a balloon payment attached to it. Our intent all along had been to restructure that debt, whether the waterfront project moved forward or not, to eliminate that balloon payment. So essentially stretch out the term so we wouldn't be making that payment. In the interim period of time, the city council has authorized the acquisition of another leasehold, the Redondo Fisherman's Cove Company, for $9 million. So what we would do as part of this refinancing would be to add that to the principal we would be looking to refi, and then look to set up a term that would then amortize that refinance over a longer period of time. So we're trying to keep our debt service level or reduce our debt service, even though we're adding principal to the balance that we owe. And the way we would do that would be to just extend the term, of the debt service. So that's what we're trying to do on that. We're looking. It looks like that may be at the October 17th city council meeting. We're still working through whether we're going to have all the materials ready for that. Also on that meeting on the 17th, we are planning to bring back the contract for the falconry service. We are going to, and I'll get to that eventually, we're going to have the falconer come to our October Harbor Commission meeting. Some of you were not here when the contract was initially approved. You may have questions. You may want to talk to him, understand the program. Yeah, when I booked that, I didn't know that, so that may or may not be the case.
A question on that, though?
Sure,
I've had
absolutely.
people ask me, when we got the falconer, did you look at the impact to the migratory and protected birds? Is that?
We looked at, we didn't do a study of that. I mean, we had a lot of conversations, and we continue to have conversations with the falconer in terms of what impact it has on any of the bird populations that are in the harbor.
Like the herons and...
You know, the herons, the pelicans, some of those populations. I mean, the falcons do fly. The birds are aware of them. They may move more quickly through our area as part of that process.
I'm just wondering if it would deter them from nesting, if they see them, because their young would be in the trees right next to them.
That's a good question. We haven't asked the nesting question. We could ask that of him.
Okay.
He's pretty knowledgeable, and he's got the person who runs the program for him.
Just seems logical, since the Coastal Commission says we can't trim trees or do anything because of the nesting birds. We got to look at what the falconer does to nesting birds.
We'll ask him. We'll definitely ask him.
Not that I'm against the falconer. I just want to make sure we're not scaring out herons.
No, I understand the question. I think that's great. So their proposed contract is set to start on December 1st, and so that's why we're bringing that to you. For any questions or concerns you may have, you can ask him, and then we'll be taking that to the City Council for their consideration. On our to-be-determined list, we are working on a consent to an amendment to a sublease with the Bay Club. So Marina Cove Limited has asked if the city would consent to an amendment to that sublease. And principally, the amendment is to have the term of the Bay Club sublease run with the term of the Marina Cove lease. So right now, the Marina Cove lease runs through 2032. The Bay Club sublease runs for a shorter period of time. The Bay Club would like to make some capital improvements to their facility. In order for them to justify the capital expenditure, they are looking for an extension of term of their sublease. So that would be something that we are taking to the City Council for their consideration as to whether they want to consent to that sublease amendment or not.
Question on that?
Sure.
Have they elaborated what kind of improvements, capital improvements they're
They haven't.
contemplating?
My understanding is that they intend to submit a capital improvement plan. They didn't tie themselves down to this, but their intent is to submit a capital improvement plan following that extension going forward. What they included in the lease, and one of the amendments that they have proposed, is depending on how substantive that capital improvement plan is, that Marina Cove would also give them some relief on some of the rent escalators, particularly the CPI escalators that they have in the sublease. The way we get paid, that's a zero effect to us in terms of whether they make that adjustment to the sublease or not. So their incentive is to do the capital improvements and then get relief on the consumer price index inflation adjusters that are in their sublease. So if they don't do anything, then their term would run coterminous with that, but their intent, as we understand it, is to do some level of improvements, although those were not defined as part of the amendment that we received.
So the income to the city doesn't change either way?
It doesn't.
And to the Bay Club, they get a relief?
They get a little relief depending on, and I didn't bring that with me, but if they spend $2.5 million in capital improvements, they get a certain level of relief. If they spend $5 million, they get a little additional
TI
relief.
allowance.
It's
that
like a
they're
TI
getting.
allowance.
Okay. So then what's in it for the leaseholder?
For Marina Cove?
Right.
I think Marina Cove would like to just ensure that they have that tenant for the period of time that their lease with the city is in place.
So they can capitalize on the TI.
Yeah, their sublease expires end of this year. It's December of this year.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, so they're eager to get the Bay Club would like to stay. They'd like to make some capital improvements. Their sublease expires at the end of this year, and so they definitely want to get a term increase on their sublease.
That's direct with the city?
No, we don't contract directly with Bay Club. It goes through Marina Cove.
Okay.
Yeah, they're a sublessee of Marina Cove. But anytime a sublessee amends a lease,
we have to have
the city's consent.
I understand. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Will their improvement plans come before the Harbor Commission for review?
Probably depends on how extensive they are. Yeah, I would think so.
Sounds extensive from...
Yeah, I'll ask that question. Let me double check on that.
Good question. Yeah.
And are they looking to expand any further physically beyond the footprint of the current club right now?
Inside the building, they have some additional space that's not currently dedicated to the Bay Club. And so as part of the lease amendment, they would acquire some of the interior space, but no new structures erected. It would just be acquiring some of the space that's not currently part of their leased premises inside the existing building. And we haven't gotten all of our ducks in a row to know exactly when that may go to the city council for their consideration. Some miscellaneous items now to sort of follow up with you on. It was mentioned earlier that the parking garage project is underway. We are thrilled about that. We had actually requested, and I think I reported to you that we had asked the contractor to wait until after Labor Day just so we wouldn't be disruptive to some of the summer activities, even though we know September and October can still be busy periods in the harbor. We wanted to at least get past the Labor Day. So they started that on September 5th, immediately the day after Labor Day.
Is there a better way they can route the bike path through there?
Yeah, I mean,
right now you can all the bikers, because I bike commute.
Yep.
All the bikers are getting off the, they're sharing the pedestrian lane now because they pushed the pedestrians
That's
on
right.
the bike path. So all the bikers are getting off and going down that one drive lane that's right next to what's now the
the
pedestrian
one that's
section.
the open drive lane. It's not in the corridor that they've cordoned off for the bikes and the pedestrians.
Yeah, the next one.
They're going outside of that and just driving through the garage.
And they drive through, but then to get back into the pier, you have to physically move the what do you call them, the barricades. If they could spread that out a little and just make that the formal bike path, and then you prevent, and you put a caution because you're sharing it with traffic, but all the bikers are doing it anyway because they don't want to walk beside the bicyclists all the way through there. So
Yeah, it's supposed to be. I mean, it was when they put the circulation plan in, it was intended to be for a short period of time. The bicyclists were supposed to walk. It's a walk
But
zone.
nobody's doing it. I'm
yeah.
telling you in practice. So it'd be
Yeah.
safer if they just make it formal, say caution shared with traffic, and then come back in.
20 years ago, I was on the Public Works Commission. I'm one of the ones who approved the new route through there. At the time, city staff assured us that the only time you'd have to get off and walk is during summer weekends when you had a lot of traffic. No sooner did the changes to the bike path get made that the police department decided that everyone was going to get off and walk 24/7, 365.
And nobody does.
And that's how that came about.
Yeah. Well, now, I mean, and what Commissioner Light is referencing is the way that the construction staging is set up in the garage right now is what was the bike path that went through the garage, as well as the pedestrian path that was along the Horseshoe Beach, has all been pushed together into a joint path on the interior of the garage, just for the duration of the construction period. And it's signed and was intended to have the bicyclists from now till the end of the project in November. So for a 3-month period, we were requesting that the bicyclists get off and walk that length of the construction, which would also include actually past the construction where the regular walking zone is, for part of that. We can, I know that was heavily discussed with Public Works as part of the construction project. I mean, we'll take a note of it and ask if there's any further adjustments. It might pinch into the parking even further if they're
No, just route them down that traffic lane and say
without
caution.
a
shared.
dedicated, so there's a shared with the car.
Yeah.
Sharrows.
Well, I wouldn't paint it because it's temporary, but yeah.
So
I mean,
just-
that's what everybody's
just
doing
route them
anyway.
down the drive aisle.
Yeah.
Okay.
Are they putting cathodic protection when they fix the rebar in the facade?
Installation of galvanic anodes.
Okay, that's that's.
So I was so they're working on the upper pier level and the lower basin level. That's going to be done in phases. The scope of work is concrete repairs to the floor, ceiling, beam, column, and walls, repairs to expansion joints. They're going to paint the concrete and the structural steel. They're installing the anodes. And they're removing and installing the traffic topping membrane.
No, that's good because that prevents the rebar from
Yep.
continuing to expand and corrode. So that's.
We talked about where the rerouting of the bike path and the sidewalk is, and then as a result of the parking garage project, we had a presentation on some new signage that was going to be put in as part of the bike path improvement. So they're going to wait, obviously, because some of that signage and some of that striping work was going to be inside the garage. So as soon as the garage project is done, then they'll move on to doing the bike signage, and that'll only take them about a week or two to finish that work once the work in the garage is completed.
So that'll be in November?
So that'll be in probably late November, more likely early December, because the
December.
construction project in the garage is not expected to wrap up until late November. So you'll probably see when they're taking down their staging and their equipment, at that same time, you'll probably have Public Works come in behind them and do
You guys
whatever
got
signage.
stuck there first day.
Yeah.
They put the truck in, they could get through.
So then we're on to events. We have a few events. Yoga on the Pier continues to occur, and that occurs on Pad 10 on the second Saturday of the month. And then we have the meet and greet with the Falconer. So speaking of the Falconer program, the last meet and greet, so we have a program, it's actually been very successful, where people have an opportunity to come out and meet the Falconer on the first Wednesday of the month. The last one of those will be on October 4th from 10 to 11. So that's kind of the last one for the public. But as you all know, anytime you want us to schedule some time for you, if you want to go out and see the activity that's going on out there, we're happy to do that. We do have a police department sponsored skating event. So the police are sponsoring a skateboard event out on the pier, which is going to be Saturday, October 14th on Pad 10. So it's a professional demonstration, competition, awards, all structured by the police department. It's a community outreach program that they're doing. It's their first one. They're hopeful that this will be successful. They're advertising it pretty broadly in terms of some of the posters they're distributing and trying to get some of the youth involved to come down. It's a good opportunity for the police to interact with some of the youth of the community through this skate event.
Push for a skate park here.
Yeah, so might even be a bigger push after this. Obviously, everybody has to sign a waiver, the parents, they got to have their safety gear, et cetera. So it's being very well managed by the police department, but wanted to make sure you were aware that that's an event that's going to happen down on the pier.
When is that?
And that's on Saturday, October 14th at 11 a.m. And on that day, which happens to coincide with our normal yoga on the pier, the yoga on the pier will be out on the municipal pier that day. So rather than Pad 10, they'll go out to the end of the municipal pier.
And Pad 10 for the public's the octagonal, the old
Yes,
octagonal building.
that's correct. That's correct.
Director, question. I know this is not in your purview of work, but do you know if the police department is reaching out to the local schools and letting them know this event is going on? And
Yeah, they're doing a very extensive outreach program, and in fact, they have a dedicated community liaison, Dinah Leary, who's now part of the police department, and so she's very active in terms of trying to get this pretty broadly publicized in schools and businesses, and so I think they're really hoping to get a good turnout for this event. Like I said, they'd like this to be something they do on an annual basis, so they're making a pretty hard push for this first event to get their marketing out far and wide.
Are they going to have ramps installed?
Yep, exactly.
The big showcases?
It's a great place for it.
Yeah, it's a great place for it.
Can watch from up above.
And you may know this. We've reported this previously. We do have a skate camp that occurs there in the summertime. There's another organization that runs a skate camp. Not as extensive as this, but it's like a summer program that's there. So it's a nice spot to have it. And I think it's going to be really well received. So we're looking forward to that.
I support it on my recovered skater. Too bad knees, I can't do it.
So then the last thing on my list is just to give you an update on what we'd like to do for the October meeting. First note is just wanted to make you aware that I wasn't going to be attending that meeting, but Lori's going to sit in my place so that we don't have to cancel the meeting. So we'll still have our meeting in October. We would like to bring to you a update on where we are with the mooring transition program. So it's been up and running for the summer, so I think it's probably good to have the folks come in and talk to you about what's going well, what we could improve on in terms of the mooring program. I can tell you we have seen an uptick in terms of the mooring
reservations. We'd like to see the numbers behind that.
Yeah, so it's actually encouraging, for just having made the transition just a few months ago. I think just having a presence, you'll hear this all next month, but I think just having somebody available 7 days a week to answer the phones and to catch the reservations and not have some of them slip through the cracks, I think just the presence in and of itself is helping capture more of those calls that otherwise might have been missed, or folks who weren't able to connect with the Harbor
Gone
Patrol
from
folks.
very little to twice
Yeah,
little,
we've stepped up. Yeah.
To a little more.
You'll also have the harbor master here, so the quarterly report from Chief Metzger we'll have at that meeting, so you have an opportunity post-summer to kind of hear from him and what's been happening in the harbor on that. I just mentioned that the Falconer will be here. We believe he's bringing bringing a bird with him. Yes, we believe he's bringing one of his birds, so you'll have an opportunity to, again, check in with him, ask questions you may have of him. And then October is normally your meeting where you have your election of officers. So that normally occurs at your October meeting, so we would be putting that on the agenda as well. Then one thing that we're looking forward to the November meeting, just to give you a preview of what we're thinking kind of for that next meeting after that, notwithstanding the boat ramp conversation and what may or may not come out of the boat ramp and what the council decides to do with that. The November meeting is when we intend to bring to you an RFP for SUP users in the harbor. I think I may have mentioned to you previously that
For vendors.
for vendors. Yeah.
You said users.
Did I say? I'm sorry. Thank you. For vendors in the harbor. Yeah, we've been having some issues with some vendors who are off-site vendors renting boards and then delivering them to the harbor. So they're really using public resources to conduct their personal business. We're trying to get a handle on that, but one of the things that we think would be helpful would be to revisit this notion of creating a more formal permitting process to allow vendors to operate in the harbor.
And you'd force like a TAR's hands to go through that?
No,
I
none
know
of
we
the
talked
none of the
about
brick
it,
and
but-
mortar folks.
Okay.
So while
these are the guys who pull up with our.
Correct.
Okay.
So all of our brick and mortar folks, Tarzan, Paddle House, those folks, I mean, they have a lease with us, they pay percentage rent to us, they have all the proper insurance, et cetera. What we're experiencing are other operators who aren't part of our community in the harbor, who maybe have just an online presence where you go online and you say, yeah, I'd love to rent a board for half a day, and they show up with a truck and they unload 3 or 4 boards. We don't have a whole lot of control over that process. We'd like to try to get more control over that. One of the things we had talked about a couple of years ago was implementing this RFP process where vendors could compete for, maybe it's a set number of permits, and that they would pay some amount of money, whether that be a monthly minimum, whether that be a percentage rent. This is not unlike what LA County Beaches and Harbors does for people who want to run surf camps at the beaches, things like that. So in those instances, somebody pays a one-time fee and then they pay a percentage of what they earn in proceeds back to county beaches and harbors. We think something like that model would be appropriate for folks who are coming, using resources, using hand launch facilities, causing wear and tear, and allowing the city to recover some proceeds from the businesses that are being conducted in the harbor.
I think one of the things we should talk about is the mandatory safety briefings.
That's it.
And stickers. In Dana Point, they put stickers on the actual rentals so that you can see the areas that it's right there where the SUPs are supposed to go. It's like the poster that's, or the sign that's right at the, but I don't know if you've looked at that. That's upside down. It confuses a lot of people. Because you look at it and the outer breakwaters inside. And
the challenge with those boards is they're in different locations within the harbor, and so unless we made each one unique to the geographic location.
It confuses a lot of folks.
That would have been the challenge.
But I think we got an SUP. When I SUP down in Dana Point, it's a lot more, they seem more courteous towards boaters and understanding, and I'm not sure what's driving that. Because here, I don't think anybody's being mean, but they just don't seem to know. And the other thing I see here is the paddle boats, the kayaks, everybody harasses the marine mammals. They don't stay the right distance away. They're all getting their selfies right up close. And I know the Harbor Patrol's probably full, but that's a pet peeve.
So that whole RFP process, I think, will be part of a discussion that we're right now planning to have for your November agenda, as well as by that point we expect the budget process to be wrapping up and have the financial info, and so we want to make sure we come back and give you an update on the budget that you've been requesting.
That'll definitely be on the November
That will
agenda,
be on the November
our
agenda.
budget scenarios. Okay.
One other thing from a safety perspective, I was always taught you wear a leash. And that way, if you kick the board out, it's not going too far. Your likelihood of hitting somebody else or getting in the way of somebody's a lot less. And if you don't know how to swim well, you're at least attached to your board and can reel it back. And God forbid, if there's wind, you'll never catch up to your board. So
I don't know if maybe when the harbor master is here next month, it might be worth asking what.
I know they hit them up on the PFDs, but I don't see anybody out there with a leash other than the guys who go outside the harbor.
So that actually concludes my report. Happy to tackle any other questions or comments you may have.
Yeah, any updates on Gold's Gym, the land use?
So we have a proposal. The next step for the Gold's Gym site is for us to conduct an appraisal of that. We've been a little sidetracked with a couple of other matters, but we intend to take a scope of work to the city council to authorize us to initiate the appraisal process for the Gold's Gym property. So hopefully once that appraisal is complete, then we can sit down with the interested purchaser, which is the Crown Plaza Hotel, and see if we can strike some kind of a purchase agreement with them for that particular piece of property. So the next step for that is for us to take the appraisal contract to the city council for their approval.
Okay, and that is what your
It could
horizon?
be, it'll depend a little bit on work within the city attorney's office in terms of putting the contract together. If we can do it, we'd do it at the October 17th meeting. Might drift one meeting past that.
Okay.
But that's right now what we're mapping out for that process.
All right.
Chairman, question. So on that appraisal, do you think it would make any difference to the valuation, whether it's appraised now or after the waterfront is entitled? That could be a substantial delta. It's a rhetorical question. And that delta is going back to the city's bottom line, right? It's the fund, the harbor fund. So.
Right, it comes right back, hopefully to the harbor and to the tidelands.
So when the appraiser.
We'll go back to the tidelands, the funding, so the process will be, once a value is determined, and if we manage to strike a purchase agreement with, say, the Crown Plaza, any monies paid is monies that are returned to the tidelands fund, because that's tidelands property. And so if we sell it out of the tidelands, we put that money into the tidelands account.
Because the appraiser will have would have to stretch out with the analysis to find a like asset. And for this asset, based on what it is today, it'll have a certain value, but with the entitlements and what can potentially be done with the surrounding. So then timing becomes a discussion that you, city manager and council, probably should have at some point, if it hasn't been discussed.
Good point. That was my only question. I don't know if anybody else have any questions on the director's report? Motion to receive and file? Oh, I'm sorry, public? Of course.
Good evening, Commissioners, staff. Mark Hansen, King Harbor boater. On behalf of the Lanakila Outrigger Club, I would like to announce the third annual Ohana fundraiser. This will be on Saturday, September 16th from 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. This year, again, they're going to be supporting our military, this time through the Torrance YMCA, who has some extensive military support programs, financial assistance for before and after school for the kids, mental counseling for those guys who come back had a rough time in Iraq or Afghanistan. Tickets are only $25 or $100 for a family of 6, and all kids under 12 are free. I've been going to this event the last 2 years. It's really, really cool. I want to get the word out because this is just really, really neat stuff that our outriggers in the YMCA are doing. Now, you might notice that is the afternoon of the same day that we're doing the coastal cleanup. So we're going to get all the harbor all cleaned up, and then we're going to have a giant party, and we'll probably have to clean up again. Thanks.
Is that at the Lanakila site?
I'm sorry, it's Seaside Lagoon. Seaside Lagoon. I'm
Seaside
sorry I
Lagoon?
missed that.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. Any other public? Motion to receive and file the director's report?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much, Director Proud, for putting that together for us. There's loose ends that need to be eventually put to bed. Lori, we look forward to seeing you in that chair. Item 10, members' items and referrals to staff. Commissioner Callahan?
Do you know the schedule for cleaning the mooring balls? I was just out kayaking and they look pretty nasty.
We can check with Public Works when it's next scheduled. They have a regular cleaning program that's part of the maintenance contract that was entered into. but we could ask them, where they are on that cleaning schedule.
Because when the water's warmer, more stuff grows. When the water gets cooler, it doesn't grow as fast. But yeah, as I went around them, I went, ugh.
Or kelp. Kelp's the other way around.
Kelp likes cold.
Okay, we'll report back on when they have that next schedule to be done. So they have
the contract out for
they have
that.
they have a contract. They have quarterly maintenance. They have annual maintenance. So there's a prescribed maintenance program that's a part of the contract for the moorings. So I suspect what you're talking about is some of their quarterly activity, but we'll make sure we understand when that was either last done or will be done on the next cycle.
Sounds like a pretty easy thing to clean. You don't have to have a diver.
If you do it often.
Well, if you do it often enough.
Yeah, right. Like your house, right?
If you're pulling up the sand line, you want the sand line
You
clean.
want the sand line clean.
Anything else?
No, that's
Commissioner?
all. Thank you.
Commissioner Scherer? Commissioner Keidser?
It's not really a referral, it's more of a comment, and I just kind of feel compelled to make it. Regarding Commissioners Light and Commissioners Callahan and this October meeting, I believe, being in their last meeting, or is it this one?
This one.
Unless they're reappointed. I saw Mayor Brand here, and I know Nils was here earlier, but I'm a little confused as to why two of our newest harbor commissioners are on the cutting block. No apparent reason other than what I can see is the most recent refusal to recuse themselves and the concern over some of the threats that have been made regarding civil and or criminal consequences for that, as well as their strongly given opinions about the development in the harbor, as well as the boat ramp locations, et cetera. I don't know what's going on, but I have concerns that it seems a little timing convenient with other things that are going on. So I just want to express that concern publicly for our city councilmen that might be watching, that, the appearance, even if it's not the reason for the limbo, appearances can take over. And I would just expect that if it is going to be limboed or they aren't going to be renewed, I, as a harbor commissioner and as a city of Redondo Beach resident, would like to know why.
I don't have much of a comment. It's
not really a referral to you.
Yeah,
it's more of a.
The only thing I can probably address out of what you raised is obviously commission appointments are made by the mayor. They're confirmed by the council. So however that process plays itself out, it plays itself out. The only thing I was going to address was timing. There's these two seats just, because Commissioner Light is filling the seat that was vacated by Commissioner Bloss, and because Commissioner Callahan is filling the seat that I believe was vacated by Commissioner Horvath or Councilmember Horvath, this is their time to be up for renewal, just as part of the regular cycle. So there's nothing mysterious about the timing. The process is, you've made your comments.
Well, except Commissioner Light, for instance, was appointed after he signed the appeal, I believe. He's had been here, 2 meetings?
Yep.
And now all of a sudden, he's not an acceptable candidate for the position. So I just think that, and I would think I'm not the only one thinking this, but I would want an explanation. I don't know that I'm entitled to one, but I think that it would be prudent, considering the events of late. That's all. I didn't expect a response. I just
For the record.
felt compelled to express myself.
Very good. Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Kilroy?
Well, I'd just like to express myself. If this is your last meeting, I'd like to thank Vicki and Jim for their service on the commission, even though it was short. Vicki's wasn't.
Pretty short.
Pretty short, yeah. But thank you, and I hope I know I'll see you on the GPAC committee, and I'm sure we'll see Vicki participating in citywide events and comings and goings and whatnot. But I appreciate both of you and your insights and thoughts and your input on the commission.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Agreed.
Well said, Commissioner Kilroy. Commissioner Light?
I just want to thank my fellow commissioners. This may be my last time up here. My short but sweet. It was fun. I appreciate the banner that went on up here, and I appreciate staff's responses. I know sometimes I put you on the spot, but always professional, and I appreciate that. And I do appreciate like the thoroughness of the reports. I just wish we'd get them so we can, because I'm a details guy. I like to dig through stuff. But it's been a real pleasure to be up here and an honor. So thanks for accommodating me and participating with me. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Commissioner. My only question is, any update on the legal issues that are going on? Anything we should know? We're here as a group right now.
I don't have any updates on where we are. I mean, there may be briefings going on behind the scenes and documents being filed, but I'm not aware of any imminent proceedings that you need to be made aware of. There certainly hasn't been any rulings. There haven't been the hearings yet. So it's, as I was expressing to Commissioner Scher on the break, it's been a little quiet from our perspective, just because there's been, to the extent there's any activity happening, it's more just filing of briefs and information, not so much involving our office, but involving more of the city attorney's office and outside counsel. So not much to report on that. There certainly hasn't been any motion by the courts yet.
Okay, thank you for that update then. I don't have anything else, so with that in mind, motion to adjourn?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting's adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody.
Just a minute. To clarify, what are you, so you're saying that the bicyclists
The bicyclists
are
just come out here.